morning. Welcome to the first Ironworkers International Virtual Forum. My name is Ross Templeton and I'm International Political and Legislative Director. I'm joined here in the studio in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club by Corey Miller, International Legislative Representative in our department. We're here today to talk about the COVID-19 crisis, specifically how it's affecting our union, both through the dangers that members are facing on the job site and in their lives, and also the effect that it's had on the economy. Massive unemployment, record-breaking filing numbers week after week, and how it's affected us differently in both countries that we represent, United States and Canada. We'll be joined today by a number of well-qualified speakers, both officials and staff in our union, and current and former elected officials who have spent time dealing with unemployment crises and public safety before. Our first speaker will be the General President of our union. Eric Dean is an iron worker out of Local 63 in Chicago, and he joins us from his home where he's socially isolated today. Thank you. Eric, are you on?
Yes, I am, Ross. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for joining us today.
Actually, the home office in Chicago District Council. So
how do you like that?
Took the liberty of driving about 15, 20 miles and coming to my workstation.
All right, well, thank you for joining us here today. First question is the most important one. How has the COVID-19 crisis affected members of our union?
It's affected our members in dramatic differences depending on where you talk. First of all, we represent members in both United States and Canada. We have provinces that are essentially shut down and have no construction work going. We have some areas that have stay-at-home orders and only allow for essential workers with a very limited scope towards, public sector jobs, bridges, hospitals, things of great need to the area. And we have other areas where it is unbelievably wide open, as if there was no virus. And so it's affected us in a manner of we wanted to keep our members from being sick in the beginning. But essentially, we've took some polling from our national leaders, and we estimate we're at about 30% unemployed that we know of. But we believe there's a lot of regular companies, steady eddies, who are staying home, waiting for their jobs to either start back up. So in addition to the unemployed, we have underemployed members for sure.
Understood. And I'd like to find out from you, what concerns are you hearing directly from regular iron workers during this crisis?
In the beginning, our main focus was safety. And it's hard to know what is a safety parameter. So I signed a safety department to get our best practices. And, we look to the experts. So our members want to know what's the safest way I can avoid the virus and still work. We have others who are not sure that they can be kept safe on a job, and they want to know what their needs are as far as, can they not go to work? Can they expect unemployment? And we worked through a lot of those things through the first three government stimulus initiatives that have gone on. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And now I've asked the safety department, once we find out someone's sick on a job, whether it's an iron worker or a fellow tradesperson, what's our protocol? How do we make sure the job is clean? How do we make sure the job is safe? So the poorest question that I got, and it's not a bad question, they wanted to know when they were deemed essential, they felt they were more deemed expendable. A lot of our members are going to work and they're in urban areas, and oftentimes they're the only ones walking the streets, and they want to know, what makes them different than any other worker that might be exposed to the virus. And then the second question is how do I keep from getting sick on the job? And what do I do if, God forbid, somebody gets sick? Absolutely. Members, there's a little fear of getting sick and exposed. There's fear of being unemployed. And then there's fear of the unknown.
All right. Fear, I think a lot of folks in both countries, whether iron workers or not, are feeling right now. And part of our job as a union is to be able to answer some of that fear and at least provide a little bit of support. I'd like to ask you personally, though, as General President, what is your largest concern right now?
The health and safety of our members. We've faced unemployment before. We've faced massive unemployment before. It seems like the government in both countries has come to the rescue as far as unemployment benefits. What I'm really concerned about is we're starting now to get reports on a weekly basis of members who've been exposed, whether it be by being bussed in by common transportation. We have large scope jobs where workers are getting sick and the numbers are just spiking incredibly. And I always worry about how to keep them safe in the regular course ironwork. This is a whole nother new dynamic in keeping them healthy in addition to the regular job site safety parameters.
Okay. And Eric, your son is an iron worker, correct?
Yes,
Is he
sir.
working right now?
Yeah, his jobs are working. Fortunately, he works in the city of Chicago. There's a lot of high-rise jobs. On his job, they have a safety protocol that you have to wear a respirator and a mask to gain access to the job site elevator and hoist. And then it's a fairly significant high-rise. So you have to have different stickers assigned by the general contractor to get access to areas. He's got the good fortune of working on the ground level with his coworkers, and he's not really intermingling with other tradespeople. He's got a brand new baby, a month old, and he's concerned about how he would navigate a job. He's questioning whether he has to ride up and down material or man hoists that he would maybe be exposed. So that's he's been fortunate the last 3 weeks that he's worked at or around entrance level. It's on a 95-story building, but he's working on the ground entrance steel around the jobs.
Okay. So construction's still going on in the Chicago area. Can you talk a little bit about what we've heard from areas of both countries that have more severe shutdowns of work?
Well, the province of Quebec is completely shut down all construction. They haven't been working for a month. That's to one extreme. Then we have other provinces around the country, in the country of Canada per se, that have a mixed bag. And some are fully employed, and some have defined, like Ontario, the essential needs. New York was wide open in the beginning. Then they started further defining different things and shutting jobs down that weren't really deemed essential per se. So we have cities like DC, the state of Virginia, and Maryland. It's so close, it's hard to tell one from the other. They have a complete stay-at-home order, and talking to the employers, they are fully employed and having maybe 10 to 15% unemployment. You've got the Bay Area essentially shut down with skeleton crews, and you've got Southern California working virtually fully employed. So I talk to different business managers. I get different answers about the members' concerns. Primarily, the members are concerned. Half of them want us to shut the jobs down, and the other half want to work, but they want to make sure that we've got the protocols and that we can enforce safety on the job site. It's as torn as I've ever been as far as happy that the members who are still working are working, very concerned about how we make sure we navigate safety.
Understood. Now, and we will, throughout the rest of this program, be talking to a lot of experts in both countries about why work stoppages have varied from place to place and how the government is handling support for unemployed workers. I'd like to ask you, though, what else is the union doing besides our political and legislative action in order to adjust and adapt and help iron workers in the process, in, for example, training and safety?
In talking to our leaders around the country, there's various initiatives being done at the local union. What our international's done is obviously we've borrowed some of our organizing team to assist you politically, but in addition, we've got the safety department working to develop and monitor protocols of workers who are getting sick and how we identify the best practices going forward. We have the training department running through doing remote training. We've had the ability and capabilities to do remote and distance learning for quite a period of time. It's never been as urgent as some of our local unions observing the stay-at-home order. They now want to continue doing safety training and protocol. So we've been having safety webinars to inform the employers on what their rights and needs are, and we've been having them for the workers as well. And then our regular apprenticeship training is ongoing in a lot of places through remote or distance learning. And it doesn't warm my heart that it took a virus to do it. It took a long time to get local unions to break their traditional classroom instruction master mentor method and start using some distance learning. But I think we've opened the door to that for the future of how we're going to deliver instruction, not completely, but on a limited basis.
And we have heard questions about what's the role of the union versus the role of the employer when it comes to safety on the job. How are we handling that issue?
As everyone's well aware, we have our labor management program through Impact. So sometimes I wear my hat as the president of the union, and oftentimes we've been talking to the employers and we've been running the protocol of what they need to do to navigate safely, how their obligation is to pay affected workers, and then how the employers can have access to the best and safest practices recognized by the CDC and other government regulatory issues as far as allowing workers to do such, to do such dangerous work in addition to working on a construction environment around other people with the normal dangers on the construction site.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, we want to also get an idea beyond just what our union specifically is doing about the larger picture, what the economy, how this particular employment crisis is affecting the economy compared to other recessions that we've lived through, and what the government is able to do in order to help us out. And for that, we have our next guest. Seth Harris was acting Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration, and he has direct experience having administered federal employment programs and defending the rights of workers through his work there. Seth joins us remotely from his home. How are you doing, Seth?
I'm doing well, Ross. Welcome to my home office.
All right. Thank you very much for taking the time for us today. I'd like to first off ask, your tenure at Department of Labor was during the recovery from the last Great Recession that we had. How does this crisis compare to that one? How is it similar? How is it different?
Well, it's similar in that there's way too much pain being spread around the country, but it happened quite differently. Back in the early Obama days, what had happened was a collapse of the financial system. Wall Street utterly failed us, and we ended up with a very deep and long-lasting recession, the worst since the Great Depression. What's happened in this circumstance, and it's the first time this has ever happened in American history, is we've had widespread voluntary shutdowns of very large segments of the economy. So what happened over several months in the Great Recession is now been telescoped, and so we have much, much deeper, faster unemployment. As you mentioned earlier, we found out today that an additional 5.2 million people last week filed for unemployment claims. That takes that number of unemployed who we've counted to 30 million. The number is almost certainly higher than that. We've far exceeded the amount of unemployment we had during the Great Recession. We're probably at about 21%. The highest in the Great Recession was around 10%. But also, I mean, we have to be really humble. People like me who comment on the economy really need to be humble in trying to predict where we're going from here and whether this will be as long-lasting as the Great Recession, because we simply don't know how quickly we're going to recover. We don't know if small businesses and small contractors are going to be able to survive. We don't know if some of the big businesses that were really deeply in debt even before the pandemic, if they're going to survive. We don't know if families are going to get the money that they need so that they can support themselves, or are they going to lose their homes, lose their the places they live, lose their cars. We just don't know that yet. And we also, this is the most important thing, we don't know when it's safe to reopen the economy, meaning to get back to work. And that's the most dangerous thing right now. If we do it prematurely and lots of people get infected and then sick, that would be catastrophic for the economy, worse than what we're experiencing now. So we have to be very, very careful about how we reopen, how we get people back to work, and what the workplace and work site of the future looks like so that everybody can be safe.
Thank you. Now, in a situation like this, in a general crisis, what are some of the responsibilities of the Department of Labor in order to help? What are its powers? What can it do? And what should it be doing?
Right. So the Labor Department's a big federated agency. Let me focus on four things that the federal Labor Department, the U.S. Labor Department, does that are relevant here. The first is it oversees and administers the National Unemployment Insurance System. It's a joint state federal responsibility. The states determine who's eligible. They determine who gets benefits. They process the claims, but the federal government regulates that and oversees it. I know a lot of people are justifiably frustrated with the UI system because they're trying to get their calls answered. They're trying to get through the websites and things are crashing and it's taking a long time. But I think the UI system, all things considered, has done a surprisingly good job. Their amount of traffic, the amount of business they had, went from a couple of 100,000 in 1 week to over 3 million to over 6 million, almost 7 million. That's really astonishing. So I think the UI system is doing just fine. A second area of responsibility where I think the Labor Department is actually doing a terrible job has to do with what President Dean was talking about, and that's workers' safety and health. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration has as its responsibility to make sure that most private sector employers in the United States keep workers safe and healthy in their workplaces. Federal OSHA, sadly, has been completely absent, has completely failed to take on its job. Its guidance is quite weak. It has not been specific about the areas where we have the greatest risk, construction being one, grocery stores, healthcare, other industries, and they're not enforcing the law. They just announced this week that they're going to start enforcing the law, but obviously in a very weak way and only really targeted at the healthcare industry and wherever there are fatalities. That's not good enough. They need to do a better job there. Third, the Labor Department's administering the paid leave program. They're doing not as good a job as I would like there. They've narrowed it more than they should, but most workers should have access either to paid sick leave or paid family leave, and the Labor Department's job is to make sure that happens. And then finally, it's the Labor Department's job to enforce basic labor standards to protect against wage theft, to make sure that Davis-Bacon is enforced around the country. I'll be honest that I don't really know how that's going because that tends to happen behind the scenes, but sadly, it's a very ideological administration. Even the Labor Department leadership has been quite ideological, so I fear that they're not doing enough in those areas.
Can you talk a little bit about a little more about how the Department of Labor can act like as a watchdog, not just for safety, but for the rights of workers in a situation like this? For example, the National Labor Relations Board, is it operating? What does it do? And how is it able to protect workers' rights right now?
Right. Well, the National Labor Relations Board oversees private sector labor relations in the United States. They were effectively shut down for a sizable period of time. They were not allowing union representation elections to go forward, for example. I believe they've started that back up again. They have not been responsive throughout the Trump administration, but I think they are at least now open for business. So if there are unfair labor practices, people feel their rights are being violated, they absolutely should contact their local regional office of the National Labor Relations Board and get their rights vindicated. The U.S. Department of Labor takes responsibility, as I said, for safety and health, wage and hour protections, family and medical leave, the new sick leave program, but also protecting workers' pensions, protecting workers' health care benefits. They are open for business, although most of them, like us, are working from home. Or at least I'm working from home. I'm sure my guess is your members aren't working from home. So get them in the game. If you feel your rights are being violated, definitely talk with your union representative, but you should think about going to the Federal Labor Department, and in states that have functioning state labor departments, get them in the game to protect your rights. California, New York, other states are being quite aggressive in making sure that employers don't cheat you out of your wages, pay you what you're due, keep you safe and healthy. That's their job. Don't be hesitant to go and demand that they do their job.
Absolutely, that makes sense. If we're in a public health crisis, we may not have the right to stand 6 feet away from each other on the street, but we shouldn't have to lose our right to choose a union, right?
Absolutely.
I'd like to ask you too. Many of our viewers have probably seen headlines about how Congress has passed major support for the unemployment system. And it's something we're going to be delving into more later in the program. But what would you ask for an iron worker who says, I saw that Congress has passed a bill supporting unemployment weeks ago. I'm still having trouble just applying period for unemployment. What are some of the issues that they may be facing there?
Right. Well, I would tell that iron worker or that iron worker's family member that I understand what you're going through. There are lots of people all across the country who are having to call their state unemployment insurance offices dozens and dozens and dozens of times, not being able to get a real person. They go on the website's crashed, they can't get access. I think the best thing I can do is sort of counsel patients. The unemployment insurance system just got hit by a tidal wave of claims. Again, we've never shut down large segments of the economy all at once and had all of these workers thrown off their jobs all of a sudden. So in the best of times, the UI system is under-resourced, it's understaffed. In many cases, it's using outdated technology. Its data systems are not as up-to-date as they should be, but still they were able to deal with a huge influx of claims. I think we learned over the last few weeks that the most claims they can take is about 7 million in a week, which is a huge number of claims for a system that's not operating right. You're right that Congress passed a bill that expanded benefits. In most states, it's now 39 weeks of benefits. Few states, it's fewer. But also there's a plus up in the amount of benefits. Now you get your regular benefits plus an additional $600, and folks who for a long time have not been covered, independent contractors, the self-employed, those folks are going to get benefits now under a new system called the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. And even if you're new to the workforce, just started working, got laid off, typically you might not get UI. Now you will be able to get UI under those systems. So I would say, again, be patient, keep pushing. Those benefits are yours. You should insist on them. It may just take a little while. To their great benefit, the UI system is trying to pay out claims as quickly as possible. They're getting about 55% of the claims paid within 2 or 3 weeks, which is a little slower than usual, but still pretty good. Be ready with your pay stubs, be ready with your W-2 forms, be ready with your tax forms so that you can give them the information they need if you're out of work and you can get those benefits flowing.
Okay. Thank you, Seth. Now, if you'd stay on the line, and we can bring Eric back in, we're going to take some questions from members for the panelists here. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Corey Miller.
Corey, if I could ask, how many people do we have logged in?
I am unsure about that amount. I do not have that on my screen.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
Questions in regards to the... Should iron workers be considered essential workers, and should they be at work right now?
There are a lot of jobs where we erect structural steel or poured in place concrete where there's an instability of the steel structure or the building. So clearly, we need to be kept on the job until we can tie in the iron and make it safe and secure, tie up loose ends and cranes. There are certain jobs, for example, if there's a power outage, they want to get that power going to the citizens. So the deem of essential on a project like that to ensure a steady flow of supply of energy makes a lot of sense. If a major bridge crossing was out and finishing a box culvert allows the transportation, I would say that's essential. There are jobs I question that are commercial in nature that really don't. They'll benefit society in general, but we've been at loggerheads with our leadership as to how tight to define essential. And I sympathize with the members who feel like they're just going to work because no one else is. And it's an easy way for the projects to continue. I think housing, energy, transportation, and medical facilities are the essential services, and maybe military facilities. we work on an awful lot more than that. And so I spent a long time not really answering the question. I can define what I think is essential, and the union has talked to the leaders, but there are some places where the welfare funds are collapsing, the training funds are collapsing because there's no unemployment, there's no revenue coming in, and there's a balance between what's really essential and how do we keep the health from community spread. And it's something on the back of our mind.
Seth, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I completely agree with President Dean. Now is not the time for contractors and other employers to be worried about squeezing out a profit. Now is the time for making sure that people are safe, they're taken care of, they're getting the food and shelter, health care that they need, that public infrastructure is secure, and that buildings that might be unsafe are being reconstructed in a way that keeps them safe. Beyond that, I really want iron workers to undertake social distancing just like everybody else is. I was really troubled by some of the stories that President Dean told in his opening about iron workers getting sick because they're expected to go to work. I don't think workers should have to get sick and risk bringing the illness home to their families simply because somebody wants to make some money in this dangerous time. That's not the answer. I think we want people to stay home unless they're needed to make sure that others are safe.
Got it. Speaking of healthcare, what should iron workers be doing to make sure that they still have health insurance coverage during this time?
Well, one of the things, we got about 4 core planks as an international union that we've been working on. A, the safety of our members, first and foremost. B, unemployment security for our members if they are laid off. And then the 2 other core planks, there's actually a 5th, are relief for multi-employer pensions and relief for our health and welfare system. In Canada, since you have public health care, it's not as big an issue as it is for the states. We are asking the federal government to implement a COBRA plan, which allows continuation of benefits for our members and have a subsidy that kicks in from day one. We think there's going to be downward pressure. I've asked our staff to monitor all the health and welfare plans, how many months of reserve they have, and how much pressure it is to provide coverage, and then how will our members maintain their health care. COBRA would be a great sign by the federal government to say that they care about workers to continue their health care. And then additionally, we're seeing people review their benefit plans, and I know like some locals have offered a subsidy out of their benefit plan to give them money to care for things during their time off. It's places with excess reserves are doing that. So we're encouraging local unions to get creative, to monitor their funds, and then we're asking the federal government, we need your assistance to keep coverage because we believe there might be some long-term economic issues to the economy, and we don't know that our welfare funds can sustain the long-term duration of the effects of this coronavirus.
Got it. And then Seth, anything else to add to that?
Now, I want to agree on the COBRA point, particularly the federal government should be subsidizing 100% of COBRA. COBRA is a program that allows you to keep your employer-provided health insurance if you either have your hours dramatically reduced or if you're laid off. We had it during the Recovery Act. The government subsidized 2/3 of COBRA premiums. I'd like to see that get up to 100% and last for the full 9 months, because again, we don't know how quickly we're going to get out of this trouble. We don't know how long unemployment is going to last, and people need their health insurance, especially now that we're in a health crisis, very different from what we experienced during the Great Recession.
One thing I should note, our benefits are typically due on the 15th of the month, so we've been waiting. Our general treasurer is monitoring the reports from local unions so we can get a real-time look at what March's hours were. We'll know what the effect is on not only the work being done by our members, but more importantly, then we'll know what the revenue is coming into those welfare funds. And we believe April's going to be more significant than March's as far as impact financially.
Got it. Ross, anything else?
I have a question came in from Mike in Toronto. After pandemic is resolved, what are our union's plans to battle an assault on unionized workers, our wages and conditions? Mike suggests that now is the time to drop a non-confrontational attitude and mount a real fight and prepare for a battle to maintain what we've successfully negotiated. It's true, and it's always been the case that anti-union employers do take advantage of shocks to the economy to come after unions. How should we be fighting to maintain our rights in the middle of this crisis?
Mike's comment is spot on. Doesn't matter if you're in the United States or Canada. We fought too hard to get to where we're at on working conditions and laws that benefit workers, and we are not going to retreat because of a virus as far as an assault on workers' rights. And both our countries have different avenues on how the open shop and non-union try and whittle away at what we've fought to gain. We will be vigilant in our fight at both countries as far as defending our hard-fought gains, and we'll continue to look towards advancing our movement. We're going to be wounded and weak as far as from an economic standpoint. That doesn't mean our spirit and our fight for worker fairness is going to go away just because of this world pandemic.
And Seth, you did talk about the Department of Labor and the NLRB's role in defending workers, but can you touch again on what the federal government should be doing to defend workers' rights to organize in the middle of a crisis?
Right, and it's not just in the middle of a crisis. I mean, workers' rights to organize and to bargain collectively have been under assault for decades now. I would say that we now have the most anti-union, anti-labor president that our country has seen, certainly in the last 130 years, beating Reagan, which is really a difficult thing to do on anti-unionism. His National Labor Relations Board is the most rabidly anti-union, and they're being really ruthlessly effective in undercutting workers' rights. His Labor Department only really cares what happens to business. We're in a deeply anti-union environment in government, but let me say I'm seeing a lot of worker activism, a lot of worker organizing around the country. We saw teachers in red states walk out and fight for pay increases in their state capitals. We've seen workers in Amazon warehouses fighting for their right not to get infected by the coronavirus. We're seeing the Fight for 15 in fast food restaurants around the country and workers organizing. And I think we're seeing the same thing in the building trades and in construction around the country. I think workers are sick of being exploited. They're sick of being pitted against non-union contractors and lower wage workers around the world and here in the United States. And that's why, for the first time in a very long time, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill called the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which would transform American private sector labor law and actually put it on the side of unions and collective bargaining and workers doing both of those activities. I think that we need leadership in the country and leadership in Congress that says, we're for collective bargaining. It's a good, high quality, in the workplace way to resolve disputes. It makes sure that workers get the wages they should get, the benefits they should get. They have a voice in their workplace. They get protections like paid sick leave. They get protections like health insurance that President Dean was just talking about. We're not going to see that bill pass anytime soon, but I see the kind of rising worker activism around the country that makes that kind of bill possible. But if we don't bring it to the polling places, if we don't go into that voting booth when November comes around and get pro-worker, pro-union people elected to office from the top all the way down to your town council, those kinds of changes are not going to happen. So it's going to be up to the people who are on this call to make the difference in our country and whether or not we're going to have an effective union movement moving forward.
Absolutely. We have the power to organize and stand up for ourselves, no matter who's in government, and we have the ability to hold elected officials accountable, and that's one of the things we're certainly going to be talking about through the remainder of this program. Eric, for you, a question. Sean asks, what are we going to do about monthly dues and health insurance contributions? I think he's talking about folks who've been laid off.
Well, as far as the health insurance, depending on what country you're in the United States, right now we're assessing where we're at on the welfare reserves to cover a member, and we're asking the federal government to cover the cost of COBRA. And we'd actually like it even in front of exhausting reserves, so we don't draw those down. As far as worker dues go, we still got about 70% of our workers working. We're going to look on a case-by-case basis. The international's cut its international staff's expense accounts and travel money in recognizing that we put a stop on things. We've got people working remotely, and we'll consider what we need to do as far as membership dues as seeing how far widespread the unemployment goes. And we're waiting for that first month's hours to come in to get a baseline measurement, and then obviously we have the ability to be adept and move quickly if we're going to take some action.
Thank you. And Seth, can you, for our final question, can you speak a little bit about something that we've gotten questions about? Congress passes the law funding unemployment programs. States actually disperse the funds. Can you talk a little bit about the Department of Labor's job in providing guidance, departmental guidance in how a law is supposed to actually be carried out to states and individuals and how to follow it, and how is the Department of Labor doing as good a job as it can be in getting these guidance and instructions out?
Right. So when it comes to the unemployment insurance system, the U.S. Department of Labor, it oversees the states in their administration of the program. It's sort of the regulator, advisor, overseer of that system. It also funnels the money out to the states, both for administration of the UI program and for the benefits, in a very complicated system I'm not going to get into. So far, with respect to guidance, they've done a good job of pumping out guidance on all of the issues that need to be addressed. I think I'd like to see them be more specific on some of these issues. They're leaving a lot of issues to the states, and the states are sort of swamped. The other thing I would say is that there are states that really care about their workers and want to do the right thing for their workers. California, New York, Illinois are states that I think really want to try to get the benefits out to all the workers that they can as quickly as they possibly can. There are other states, and I won't bother to name them here, but I'm sure a lot of the iron workers in those states know who I'm talking about, that are really quite chintzy, that are intentionally withholding benefits. They're narrowing eligibility. They're shortening up the duration of benefits. That's wrong. I think that the states that are doing that really need to think about how traumatic losing a job is for an American worker, an iron worker or any other kind of worker. You know, the folks on this call, the folks on this webinar are professionals at their jobs, and they've worked hard to get where they are in their lives. And to be thrown out of work unexpectedly because of something that had nothing whatsoever to do with you is a traumatic event in your life. And I think just dealing with that, the challenge to your family, the fear that comes with it, the uncertainty about your future, how do I get back to getting paid so that I can keep my house, keep my apartment, feed my kids, pay for my car, that's a challenging thing. We shouldn't compound that by making the financial situation even more uncertain by screwing with people's unemployment insurance. People should get all the support that they need so they can get back on their feet when the country gets back on its feet. And we shouldn't make that harder by nickel and diming them at the UI office. So I'm hoping that the federal labor department, which is doing as good as it can, I think, we're a little bit more aggressive in saying the goal that Congress set was for everybody to get support. Open the doors widely, sort them out later. That's really why we want to approach this kind of thing. That should be true with paid leave and paid sick leave and paid family leave as well. We want everybody to get this support so that we don't have sick people going into work. I mean, it's nuts that we would have people who are bagging groceries and are sick, spreading that illness around. And it's not fair to those workers to force them to come to work. So I think the Labor Department can do a better job being more worker friendly, more worker focused.
Seth, just a couple on your comments. Both Ross and I recognize the need when the federal government passed the laws that there would be a transition to state responsibilities. We've reallocated about 16 of our staff members from the organizing team to assist Ross in the political department to put pressure on state leaders and legislatures to make sure that the equity for that unemployment insurance at first was going to be there. And we're using this as a political operation. I'll let Ross talk more about it probably later in the show. But we recognized that early on, that every state wasn't created equally. I know in Canada it's a little more unified, and we got some assurances that the unemployment benefits are steady and constant. But in the U.S., it's much like adopting Medicare. Not every state provides for the needs of its weakest and poorest. The same thing with this unemployment. And so, we have a way of knocking on legislators' doors and elected officials to remind them that we're their constituents, and we demand what's fair to us and what the federal government's provide.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining us today. I hope you both stay safe and stay healthy out there.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks a lot, President Dean.
Thank you, Seth. And Ross, I'll see you at the tail end for some final remarks. Thank you.
See you then. All right, next we're going to talk about the legislative situation. There's a complex interplay in both the United States and Canada, and how government support gets to ironworkers, gets to the general public. And we're going to start with the U.S. federal system. Earlier in the week, Cory Miller sat down with two members of Congress, Donald Norcross out of New Jersey, Ben Ray Lujan out of New Mexico, both coming from trades backgrounds. And we'll go ahead and run that video now.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you so much for taking the time and answering a couple of our questions. How are you today? How are you handling everything?
Listen, I'm like everybody else. We're sheltering in place, but we're staying busy, busier than ever. As you can imagine, a lot of issues going on with the working men and women of the district.
As a building trades union member yourself, what has been your personal experience with unemployment?
Unemployment is that piece that keeps us all together, that we know that this isn't a handout. We've all paid into unemployment time after time. And it gives us the ability, when we're laid off from one job, to have a living wage till we go to our next job. It's that bridge that connects it. We know how important it is. In New Jersey, we did away with the waiting week. Your vice president on our state Senate President, Steve Sweeney, has done a remarkable job working with the governor, showing him how important it is, because many people who are putting together these programs forget about multi-employer crafts like our own, or I'm an electrician, you represent the ironworkers, that they don't understand what it's like to have 5 or 6 contractors in a year. And so we fall through the cracks. That's why it's so important that Steve on the state level, me on the federal level, are always bringing up these issues that they say, oh, we have to take care of those. And that's what we're doing right now. COBRA, why that's so important on our multi-employer plans. And God forbid, our pension system. We worked our whole lives to put that money away. And through no fault of our own, we're putting in jeopardy. This is a national problem. Just as hurricanes hit Florida and Texas, we come together as a country to help them. We need to come together as a country to help our pension plans so that we all survive together. Because not doing this will cost us much more, not only as individuals, but as a country, than we need to pay attention to.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
And to play
but as you know, it's tough to explain to many of the members, how's this system work? What do you mean if somebody goes bankrupt, you have to pick it up? Nowhere else in what we do that when another employer goes bankrupt, you have to take on their liability. Only in this multi-employer system is it set up that way. And that's why it's so important that nationally we come together, and as part of our responsibility as the federal government is to make sure we fix it, because we're the ones who set up the rules.
What would you like to see done federally to help the pension plans and the COBRA plans?
Well, first of all, the COBRA plans, there's already a plan in place that we used 10 years ago during the last recession that would kick in X amount of dollars. What we're hoping to do is, at least for the first 2 months, is 100% reimbursement for those on COBRA. And then from there, depending on what condition we are as a country, either continue at 100% or drop it down to 80% if we are starting to make that recovery. Health is so important, particularly now. We're in a pandemic. It only makes sense. But as we go through this, we need to understand that the same trouble that caused our health systems to be in potential failure is causing our pension system. And each and every one of your members, the ones that I used to represent, paid into the system. And it's the design of the system that the federal government actually put in place is the cause of the failure. We need to be the cause of it coming back. So putting those plans back in, the Butch Lewis is just one of the plans that were put forward. We want to do a little bit of the Butch Lewis, but there are more things that we can do so that we change some of the fundamental problems that the pension plan has about bankruptcy that causes the problems for it going forward. So COBRA number one, pension number two, and above all that is making sure the construction industry gets back to work. We got the greatest trained people in the entire world, and we need to make sure that they can get back to work because you know what? They want to go back to work.
They do. What do you see recovery looking like?
Well, let me get my crystal ball out. I'm optimistic because the work was there before, but the fact that we still haven't created an infrastructure plan, that this president talked about it, the first thing he wanted to do was infrastructure. We still haven't done it. There is discussion now. We have to get out of this health crisis, this pension crisis. But the fact of the matter is we know our roads, our bridges, our schools, our airports, our seaports are in horrible condition compared to what they need to be. We are the greatest nation in the world, but we're running on infrastructure that's 15 years behind. We need to get that infrastructure up and running because that helps put the rest of the country back to work.
Can you describe a little what's already happened federally with the CARES package and the packages that were passed earlier in March?
Yeah, so Corey, with all that's happening across America and around the world with COVID-19, with the coronavirus, it was incredibly important for Congress to step forward immediately. And with the first $8.3 billion package that was adopted by the House and Senate and signed into law by the President of the United States, that was provide some emergency support for small businesses and for people across the country. We then moved on as we were proud to support expanded paid sick leave and family medical leave to be very aggressive in ensuring that everyone that needed to get a test would get a test for free. Now, I believe that all the care associated with the coronavirus, that's something that we need to be covering as well across the United States. There's so many people that are finding care so expensive and out of reach still today. And then as we move to Corona 3, if you will, to the third legislative package, there was a push from us in the House as Democratic leaders to Mitch McConnell. His original package centered around corporations. And it was important to us in the House and as Democratic leadership that we put a focus on hardworking families across America. And that's where we saw expanded unemployment benefits as well, in addition to more support for unemployment insurance, as well as direct payments to the American people. And so, look, I make no mistake by saying that that's just the beginning. Families across the country have been saddled with these challenges, with the economic strain on their families through no fault of their own because of the spread of the coronavirus. And that's why it's incumbent upon Congress to act and to act soon and to make sure that more relief is being sent to the American people for their pensions, for unemployment, for hardworking families, for small business owners. We need to make sure that those hospitals and those frontline employees that are deemed essential as well, that they're getting the pay that they deserve and the care that they deserve, and that all the materials going out as well with those masks and rubber gloves and what we've been known now to call PPE, that help is getting out across America.
Sounds good. Do you know exactly what you're going to be asking for in the next package? What's your number one thing that you'll be focusing on?
So for the next package, it's going to be important for Congress to continue to advocate for direct help to the American people. Again, unemployment numbers are soaring. Here in New Mexico, we're seeing a high, I think it was 17% yesterday, with hundreds of more people that are filing for unemployment. And we're still seeing a strain because those systems, all of the websites and the 1-800 numbers, there's a backlog. And the realities right now with unemployment insurance is that they're not retroactive. So I've been advocating that unemployment insurance be retroactive back to the beginning of coronavirus, because people are only covered from the time they apply. But what if they can't apply? Then they're not going to get covered. So that's number one. Number two, it's clear to me that more support is needed for states and for local governments across America. And that's why I've joined many of my colleagues in advocating smaller towns, smaller communities across the United States for places like where I grew up, right here in New Mexico, that don't qualify for direct federal support. So that's something I'm advocating for as well. But there's also shortfalls here. The House of Representatives in Corona 3, we advocated for 100% coverage for COBRA benefits as well for employees. And the Senate Republicans pushed back against that. So we need to stand with our union brothers and sisters and their advocacy across the country, and everyone that will benefit, all of the employees across America that will benefit from 100% coverage over that next 15 months for COBRA as well. And then again, direct support for our rural hospitals and hospitals across America. They need more help. So there's so much work left to be done. But in the next negotiation, that's what I've been advocating for, while we also are working on negotiation for what we'll describe as CARES 2, which will be more robust than the next package that could roll out as soon as this week. And then we need to talk about infrastructure down the road as we talk about what will be stimulus and disaster relief for investments into what could be phase 5 and 6 of legislative packages coming out of the coronavirus.
Welcome back. We've heard some reports from viewers that there's some technical issues with the webcast. If you're seeing freezes or delays, our webcaster recommends that you clear your browser cache, and that should help the video run a little bit smoother. In addition, we understand some viewers saw the broadcast start a little bit late. If that's the case, we will be posting this. Whole program on the website next week, so you'll have a chance to see the program. If you missed the first segment, we started with General President Eric Dean giving the overview of the situation for Ironworkers Union generally, but. For right now, we're going to turn over to Corey Miller to unpack a little bit of what these members of Congress were talking about. And first off, let's talk about the CARES Act. As you heard in the video, Congress has passed several pieces of legislation. The largest of them is a $2 trillion stimulus and support bill called the CARES Act. Corey, can you tell us a little bit about what's in the CARES Act?
Yes, so it provides financial aid to states, individuals, and business to help them weather the economic storm during this pandemic. The two aspects of the bill that we focused on primarily were the unemployment insurance provisions and then the Paycheck Protection Program. So with the unemployment insurance provisions, the four main things that we lobbied on, along with the other building trade unions, were the expansion of eligibility. So individuals who wouldn't normally be eligible for unemployment insurance they now have access to it. We lobbied to make sure that there was an increase in the amount. So whatever states are giving for unemployment insurance, the federal government will tack on an additional $600, and that will go until July 31st. We also worked hard to make sure that they extended the duration of unemployment insurance. So on top of whatever the state duration is for unemployment insurance, the federal government will add an additional 13 weeks. And then finally, with unemployment, we wanted to make sure that waiting periods were waived because we know that can be a big hurdle, and we want our folks getting money as soon as they possibly can. With the Paycheck Protection Program, it was created as an avenue for small businesses, veterans organizations, 501c3s, groups who normally don't have access to private loans, to give them access to the Small Business Administration's Federal Guarantee Loan Program. So these loans can be used for payroll, they can be used for mortgages, rent, healthcare, and the thinking behind this was we want to make sure these small businesses are still there when we're able to open our doors back up and go back to work. We don't want the economy to completely shut down, and we want to make sure that there are businesses that'll still be standing to hire our folks.
Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the expanded unemployment insurance and the paid sick leave, family leave?
Yes. So the paid sick and family leave, which was included in the Families First Corona Response Act, which was passed earlier in March, that requires employers to give 2 weeks paid sick leave. So let's say you're an iron worker and you've come in contact with somebody outside of a job, and your doctor is telling you that you need to quarantine for 2 weeks. You tell your employer and you should be getting those 2 weeks of paid sick leave. That compared to unemployment insurance, where let's say someone on the job or multiple people on the job have contracted the virus and your employer has decided to, you know what, let's shut down the job site for the foreseeable future, like you all are being furloughed. There's no set timeline for that, which means you are now eligible for unemployment insurance.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, can we talk a little bit more about what's not in the CARES Act package, about what we're looking for in the next action from the federal government?
So, like what was mentioned before by Congressman Norcross and Ben Ray Lujan, we are looking for COBRA subsidies. Like the last recession, the federal government paid up to 2/3 of COBRA subsidies, and we are asking for 100%. We think that is the most important concern that we should be having right now, considering this is a public health crisis. No one should be going without their health insurance. The next thing we'll be focusing on is help for our multi-employer pension plans. We had some plans that were in trouble before this pandemic happened. We are pretty certain they'll still be in trouble when this pandemic is over. So we want to make sure that they can get as much help as they possibly can during this time. And then finally, our main focus will be jobs, infrastructure. We want to make sure that there will be something there waiting when we're able to open our doors again, and there will be jobs waiting for our guys who are ready to work.
And what can the federal government do in order to ensure that those jobs are going to be there for us?
They can include job projects and policies in future stimulus packages. The biggest one that's coming up right now is the Highway Trust Fund. That goes to funding a lot of our highway and construction plans, and making sure that money goes to HUD, the Department of Transportation, that money can start flowing to these federal projects that our folks are used to working on.
Okay. And as far as the broader push, are we working on this alone, or what are we doing to cooperate with other building trades and other unions in order to move forward these priorities?
We are not alone in this. We are working a lot with our brothers and sisters in the other building trades unions, with the NABTU, with the AFL-CIO, to make sure that workers, not just our workers, but workers everywhere, are being helped and assisted during this crazy and scary time.
Okay. And members of Congress obviously aren't any more immune to this disease than any of the rest of us. Normally we'd be able to walk into any congressional office and tell them what the members need. How are we able to reach out and work with congressional staff right now, and how is Congress even voting? We can't fit all 435 of them all in one room at the same time.
No, that would violate social distancing protocols. As of right now, the House of Representatives and the Senate aren't expected to come back until May 4th, but obviously that is subject to change, knowing that anything can happen at any minute right now. The best way to reach out to your office is by phone or by email. Most offices have their voicemails set up, or sometimes you'll actually get a live person. Some of these offices do have bare bones staff still going in. And depending on the rules that will be written up for whatever law they want to pass, some votes can be done by unanimous consent, or UC. So whoever is in town at that time, if there's an unanimous consent to passing the bill, then the bill will be passed. And that is how the most recent CARES Act was passed.
All right, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Now, moving to our next segment, we're going to follow the money. The general rules are laid out by Congress, and the money comes from the federal government, but it's actually put into action by states. Most folks who've watched the news have seen briefings and press conferences by governors, but there's many different elected officials at the state level who actually put the programs to help unemployment and guarantee public safety into practice. We're going to hear first we're going to hear our legislative representative, Michelle Frisk, having sat down earlier in the week with Val Oil, who's the Commissioner of Labor for the state of Oregon, and Kathy Hochul, who's Lieutenant Governor in the state of New York. Both states have been affected in different ways, and we'll hear a little bit about what they've been doing to guarantee safety and unemployment in this video now.
My name's Val Oil. I'm the state labor commissioner for Oregon. Technically the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor and Industries.
Can you tell me a little bit about, in your position, how the COVID outbreak has affected workers in the state of Oregon?
Yeah, it's affected us pretty strongly. I mean, one of the things that our governor did was very quickly do an executive order to shelter in place because it was we saw what happened in Seattle. We saw what was happening in New York and in Europe. And so as soon as there were 9 deaths, the governor ordered shelter in place. And because of that, we flattened the curve. But what it means is that workers have had to stay home. And because unemployment checks and the federal package hasn't come yet, people had to go by April 1st without money for food or money for rent. And although different municipalities have put moratoriums on evicting people, it still is tough.
And then, we're talking a little bit about worker protections. You had issued a temporary administrative order expanding the Oregon Leave Act. Can you talk about that a little bit, what that does?
So you have the federal FEMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, and we have the Oregon Family Medical Leave Act that actually allows you to take time off if not only do you have a serious health condition, but if someone in your family has a serious health condition. And what I did was I expanded the rules to say that while schools are closed, now our governor has said that schools are closed through the end of the year, that if you need to take time off to take care of your child, that's protected leave so that your job will be protected for 12 weeks. And that's important because, and we had a lot of requests to exempt certain essential workers. And fundamentally, I believe that if you have children that need to be cared for and you have to stay home to do that, then your job should be protected. So we did that, and I was pretty proud of it.
And then, we're talking a little bit about worker protections. You had issued a temporary administrative order expanding the Oregon Leave Act. Can you talk about that a little bit, what that does?
So you have the federal FEMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, and we have the Oregon Family Medical Leave Act that actually allows you to take time off if not only do you have a serious health condition, but if someone in your family has a serious health condition. And what I did was I expanded the rules to say that while schools are closed, now our governor has said that schools are closed through the end of the year, that if you need to take time off to take care of your child, that's protected leave so that your job will be protected for 12 weeks. And that's important because, and we had a lot of requests to exempt certain essential workers. And fundamentally, I believe that, if you have children that need to be cared for and you have to stay home to do that, then your job should be protected. So we did that, and I was pretty proud of it.
And then just expanding on job protections, I know in your position as commissioner, you have a lot of job site issues, safety issues that you also deal with, correct? And
that's correct.
So you issued also some guidance as well on apprenticeship. Right. I know that apprenticeships fall under your purview.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the guidance that you'd issued as far as your apprenticeship committees go.
Yeah, we've let our apprenticeship committees and our contractors and our our brothers and sisters in the trades know that they should absolutely be practicing social distancing on the work site. And again, when we talk about what the union difference is, we have apprentices from the time that someone in the building trades is an apprentice through their entire journey career. They're trained from day one to spot safety hazards, to put safety on the work site as a priority. So what we've told our Joint Labor Management Committees is that they need to absolutely allow for social distancing on the work site.
How have the packages so far that the government has passed through Congress helped Oregon? And what more do you see needed as we're moving forward through this pandemic?
So I think that the CARES Act has helped in a number of ways. One is expanding FEMLA so that people have protected leave if they themselves have COVID. One of the things that we'd like to see is for COVID infection to be presumptive for all essential workers. So unlike some other states, our governor issued a very clear executive order that construction construction workers are an essential workforce. In some other states, they haven't been as clear. It's like some construction workers. There's a lot of clarity, but I think that having a presumption to allow COVID to be covered by workers' comp for those people that are putting their lives on the line, going to work to do essential work is critical.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Commissioner. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, and thank you for what you're doing.
Hi, I'm New York State Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, and I appreciate this opportunity to address the rank and file members of the ironworkers. And this is personal to me. I've come out of a long-time union family, so this is fantastic to just talk to our members during this really heightened sense of anxiety and stress. And I just really pleased to have a chance to talk about what we're doing in New York State.
Great. If you could talk a little bit about COVID-19 in New York and how the administration of New York State has handled the outbreak and how you're handling the response, including the executive orders that have been issued and how you believe that is curtailing or helping stop the spread. And then also a little bit about how it affects the workers in your state.
Well, we had to take some really drastic measures as we started to see the numbers in New York City just absolutely spike, and people wonder, what's happening in New York City? Why is New York State the epicenter? Why do we have probably over 190,000 cases? We've lost more people, 3 times more than we lost in 9/11. So the numbers are staggering. We continue at a high death rate right now of 6 days with over 700 people's lives being lost by day. So we have not hit any kind of a downward trend in terms of the number of fatalities, but because we engaged early on, we shut down non-essential businesses back on March 20th, and really had to shut down schools and so many other areas where people were just absolutely stunned when we did it. And people said, oh, maybe it's premature, maybe it's too early. Well, it turns out it was not. If we had not taken those preventative steps early on and gotten the word out, and I know how tough it's been on people, believe me, I know, but we would have lost far more lives than we had. And New York City particularly is very dense. Everyone takes public transportation. People live in tightly congregated areas. It's the most densely populated area of our country. And that's one of the reasons it spread so quickly. So we had to engage in really strict social distancing requirements, but also shut down businesses. And the impact this has had on workers is absolutely devastating. Our unemployment numbers are through the roof and far worse than they have been during any recession, and probably rival the Great Depression right now. And fortunately for us, we have safety nets in place. We have a unemployment benefit system that's working well. It's after a lot of people had a struggle getting through our initial phone lines and the computer. We had to upgrade a 40-year-old system. So our workers are now starting to, we'll start seeing some relief before long and start getting some of the checks. And we could talk about that more in the long term. But I also just want to say we had to issue some executive orders. And the question of construction, are people distanced enough in the workplace, depending on outdoor or indoor construction? There are a lot of variables to consider. But at the end of the day, it comes down to protecting lives. And there was a lot of anxiety among workers who were showing up to our construction sites and who are working to continue some of our, we consider the non-essential building, maybe more of the housing as opposed to, and commercial as opposed to, the roads and bridges and hospitals and public housing and affordable housing, which we deem as more essential. We want to make sure that those projects don't go by the wayside. So that's really the differential we had to invoke. And that's what we think is starting to work now even more, because we're starting to more socially isolate people even on a workplace like a construction site. It was all about protecting the workers.
Yeah, thank you for answering that question. And like you were talking about going a little bit further into unemployment and the benefit aspects, your unemployment system was 40 years old, as you said. It sounds like that's actually pretty common throughout all of the states. And you've taken the necessary steps to upgrade the system and bring on additional teleworkers to handle the new load of unemployment cases?
Here's what we did. We had a system that was accustomed to dealing about 50,000 claims a week, 50,000 phone calls to our call center. We went from 50,000 to 10 million calls almost overnight. So we ramped up to have over 1,000 employees now answering calls. We retrained people who may have worked at our environmental protection agencies, who worked at our DMVs. They have now been retrained to be able to answer calls and help people process this. So we had to restructure our workforce to make sure we had enough bodies to take care of this. Also, we brought in Google to redo our website completely. It was tough, antiquated, a lot of questions being asked that you really didn't have to have answered. And we also did the best thing, which is instead of filling out your application online, but then there's some question that you needed to talk to a person about, and that's when the phone lines got really jammed up and people have been waiting for weeks. We've now instituted a system that just went into effect a couple of days ago that if you need more information given to the state and you need to talk to a live person, because that's what your application says, give us your phone number and we'll call you back in 72 hours at the latest. So that just freed up a lot of the pressure and stress that was on our unemployed workers. And I'm really glad we got that in place. And so over the next couple of weeks, people feel more relief. And the good news is, as we've said all along, this is stressful. You want that money as soon as possible. If you're trying to make a mortgage payment or a rent payment or a car payment, but the money you're going to receive is retroactive back to the date you lost your job, not the day you file. And I think that gives people a little more comfort when they hear that as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for that. And, when we're talking about unemployment too, the Congress has, passed the CARES Act as the third package related to the coronavirus. How has that helped New York State? And what do you see as something more that you may need in a fourth package?
There are different ways of looking at the CARES Act. And again, with respect to the unemployment benefits, we're glad it was extended the length of time, 13 weeks on top of our 26 in New York. So people can get up to 39 weeks of benefits, which should get us through this for sure. Also, New York State has committed to ensuring that the additional $600 that has been promised under the CARES Act is something that we will free up and get that sooner than later, so people don't have to wait for a separate check, that they will get that as part of their unemployment. So we're expecting that that's going to start showing up in people's bank accounts soon if they had direct deposit. Unfortunately, those who did not have direct deposit, it's going to take longer, and that's extremely unfortunate. So those are two areas where we worked, we think the CARES Act is working for people, or will start working with people. Also, small business assistance is important.
Thank you. And then when we're talking about unemployment, I know you talked about coming from a union family, so you probably have some personal experience with this. Have you experienced unemployment in your life? And how do you see New York handling the long-term effect of this? And how do we get back to work when this is over or as it's ending?
That's a good question. And I did experience seeing, my dad was, when I was just a little kid, he lost his job for a while. And also there was a major strike that was being done by the steel plant. And, he had to borrow money from people to take care of his young family. And I was just a kid. I remember how stressful that was during the strike. And also, I was a waitress in high school and through college. And I know what it's like to not have any sick pay days. I know that in New York State, we just instituted that people no longer can go without having paid sick days. I didn't have any vacation days. I worked very minimum wage, below minimum wage when you're a waitress. So I know the stress of that when you're trying to, cover your own expenses and take care of your needs. I can't imagine dealing with it with a family to take care of. That is an incredible pressure. And what we're doing in the state is letting people know that there's assistance out there for them as well. And a lot of proud people who've worked as steel workers or worked as iron workers and work with their hands, they're not accustomed to asking for help, but this is not their fault. This is no one's fault. You did nothing. And if you find yourself unemployed now, it takes a real hit to your ego. It's your image of yourself as a provider of your family. It's tough. We actually instituted an emotional support hotline, and we are getting lots and lots of calls from people who are just calling and saying, how do I cope with today? How do I get through the day? And there's no shame in that, no stigma. So we're trying to help people just deal with the emotional draining on them and their families as they have to undergo unemployment for the first time. And so I'm acutely aware also when the steel plants shut down, grandpa's job was gone, my uncle's jobs are gone, everyone around me was losing their jobs. In Lackawanna, Buffalo, New York, when I was growing up, the phrase was last one out, turn out the lights. Everybody was leaving because these good paying middle-class jobs from the manufacturing and the building base. And I have family members who are plumbers and longshoremen as well as iron workers themselves. I'm used to this. This is why I went into public service, to help people who have to deal with these dire circumstances. So our state is very, very keenly aware of these demands on our residents, and that's why we're trying to lift that burden off them in every way we can.
We're going to start having members losing their health care here in another month or so. And COBRA is available, but I'm sure you're aware of how much that costs out of pocket to each of our members.
As we go forward and this unfolds, and as you said, a lot of these workers are going to lose their benefits. COBRA is outrageously expensive, and that has to be part of the stimulus, the next phase, to figure out how we can help supplement those families so they're not hit with this cost. Again, this is not their fault. They didn't just decide to stop working. They were forced to stop working, and the government has to recognize this, that it's all part of the collateral damage of this pandemic, and there is a federal responsibility to help make people whole and not make them have costs that it could literally bankrupt a family. The cost of COBRA is so exorbitant. And New York State, again, we have very good, strong coverage for workers and our residents, but a lot of states are falling behind, and the federal government needs to pay attention and do something now to address this before we go off that cliff.
Welcome back. Right, now we'll unpack some of the material that we heard in these interviews, and to help us do that, we're joined from Spokane, Washington by Ironworkers Legislative Representative Michelle Frisk. Michelle, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing today, Ross?
Well, thank you very much. Let's talk first about the implementation of the CARES Act by the states. Once the CARES Act is passed, once this money is available, states need to sign on in order to get it. Correct? How are states putting the unemployment program into practice?
That's correct. So all 50 states have signed on to the CARES Act already, which means that they agree that they will extend benefits by 13 weeks. That everyone on unemployment will receive an extra $600 per week. There have been varying degrees of how well this is working yet, and some states the first extra $600 checks have already gone out, but in most states it's upcoming in the next week or so.
So, because the $600 is on top of what the state would normally allow, there's still going to be some difference from state to state how much UI an ironworker is going to see on the checks. Correct?
That's correct. So depending on the state and any previous claims that have been done in this year, this amount of weeks would vary, but you would still be eligible for the extra 13 weeks on top of whatever the maximum is. For instance, like we were just talking about New York, and their maximum is 26 weeks. So you get another 13 weeks, bringing it to 39 weeks total.
Understood. And how essential is this federal support for the state UI programs? Were they ready for this crisis?
Not at all. To be really honest with you, every single state is having a lot of problems implementing the new system, and they just frankly do not have the workers available to process claims at the speed that they're coming in. Over the last 4 weeks now, unemployment numbers just came out this morning. Another 5.2 million people applied for unemployment last week. That brings the 4-week total to about 22 million. And the states just do not have that capacity to process that many claims. So what is happening is many states are updating their servers, adding servers. In some states, they're cross-training other state employees from other agencies to become unemployment customer service agents. That way they're maintaining their job and they're helping get through this large backlog of claims that are coming in. But there's still a lot of work to be done as well. So it's an ongoing test of patience, to be really frank with you, at the state level and for our members.
So so many states are experiencing problems getting UI claims approved just because, as you say, they don't have the capacity to handle the numbers. Are we seeing some states where elected officials, though, are deliberately pinching pennies, making it difficult for folks to get the unemployment coverage they need?
Unfortunately, yes. So when part of the agreement with the CARES Act is that each state had to participate in the federal guidelines, which means not just extending the benefits and doing the extra $600 a week, but also waiving the waiting period, not requiring work searches, and waiving the able/available to work. Because frankly, right now, if you're being affected by COVID, whether you have it or you've been exposed to it, or you think you might have been exposed to it, you cannot go to work. And so one of the problems that we have run into is that someone is frankly honest and says they are not able to work, and then they are not eligible for the unemployment benefits. So those are some issues that we are working through at the state levels, and some of them are just programming issues, and some of them are fundamentally, like you said, just pinching the pennies. So there is a lot of miscommunication and still a lot of need for guidance in these issues.
I see. So the elected officials that we have going into this crisis in a lot of ways are determining the results that we're getting, whether we're seeing these unemployment checks in time and at the levels they need to be. The elections do matter.
Absolutely. And to be really, really frank with you, we're seeing a cluster of states with a really common theme, and elections do matter. Knowing who we're putting in office makes a very big difference in your paycheck every day, but especially right now.
Well, let's talk about elections then. Clearly, the tradition of lining up in front of a polling place isn't going to work very well in the middle of a quarantine situation. And we've seen in a number of states that went forward with in-person voting during the Democratic primary. For example, Illinois and Wisconsin, voters had a lot of trouble actually voting. Can you talk a little bit about how states are adapting to the COVID crisis, which we don't know how long it could last? We may still be under conditions like this when we get to November.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, only 2 states are completely all mail-in ballots, so no more polling places, and that's Washington and Oregon. Alaska actually just adopted a very similar rule, which will essentially make them an all mail-in state. Every other state has some form of absentee program, and you have to request an absentee ballot with a valid reason. And in some states, that's very liberal, what the reason can be, and in others, it's very restrictive. What we're trying to do right now is make sure that COVID-19 is one valid reason to receive an absentee ballot. Because as you said, the in-person voting in Illinois continued, and then we saw what happened in Wisconsin with lines around the block where people were trying to exercise their right to vote and socially distance themselves from each other. And you shouldn't have a fear of getting sick just for going to vote. The best place to vote is at your kitchen table right now. And so we are really working towards that. Unfortunately, some state constitutions don't allow for mail-in ballots. So there's a lot of work around that we need to do, and frankly may have to do some amendments to state constitutions to allow this to proceed as well as possible. That is a process as well. So there are several different ways that the states, Secretary of States have been coming at this, and one of them is expanding the absentee voting eligibility and requirements.
Now, dealing with changes in the way that elections are going to be carried out, similar to dealing with the influx of unemployment claims. It can't be cheap or easy to make all these changes on very short notice. Is the federal government providing any support, financial or guidance otherwise, to states to help them make this transition and protect people's right to vote?
Yes, in the CARES package, in addition to the unemployment funding, they also have funding in order to help upgrade any system that they need to, the servers, the software, et cetera. The states do have to request that, though. I see a lot of states that are doing that. There is a handful of states that have not implemented CARES fully yet because they are still waiting for further federal guidance. And that's unfortunate. We've got Louisiana, Kansas, and Alabama, they're all have CARES on the books, but they're still waiting for further guidance as far as doing waiver of the waiting period and implementation of the $600 extra per week. So there is still work to be done, and there on the federal and state level, where the federal government does need to be a little more clear in its guidance, and that the states need to be quicker at implementing that guidance.
Okay. Now, shifting for a minute, let's talk about executive orders. One of the biggest differences that ironworkers on the ground are seeing from place to place are areas where construction work is banned or construction work is considered an essential industry. And these determinations are being made by governors and mayors, correct? Can you talk a little bit about what executive orders are and how they're being used in this crisis?
Yes. So an executive order is an order that is that is signed by a governor, a county commissioner or executive, or a mayor, and also at the national level by the president. And it has the full force of the law. So we're seeing in 43 states there are executive orders basically for shelter in place or stay home orders. And they have included varying degrees of essential versus non-essential businesses. In most states, construction is considered essential. But there is guidance from the Department of Homeland Security on critical infrastructure. And we're seeing some states move towards that now. New York and Washington have moved towards a critical infrastructure, essential businesses only. Critical infrastructure in the construction field is things like the critical manufacturing, dams, defense industry bases that we work on, energy services, and waterways, wasteways. So those are the areas, there are more than that, but those are the areas where if construction were to stop, it would severely affect the general public. So in those cases, we're really looking at job site safety as well. We're looking at how we can implement more social distancing on a construction site. Sometimes this is done by going from 4 shifts down to 3, staggering breaks, staggering lunches, not leaving your tools in the dry shack or the Connex, but taking them home and making sure they're clean, increasing PPE, personal protective equipment, as far as wearing masks and gloves on some sites. There's a lot of different steps that we can take to be safe on the job site.
So these essential categories, as they're laid out, are coming from the Department of Homeland Security, but these are suggested. This is guidance, correct? It is the states themselves that are determining how many of these jobs are staying open. Can you talk a little bit about that back and forth, the way that the federal government advises the states and then the states actually put it into practice?
That's correct. So the Department of Homeland Security issued a guidance on 16 critical infrastructure areas. The states do not have to abide by that. It is up to the governor when drafting an executive order or amending it, what is essential or non-essential. So in the states where construction is just blanket considered essential, there's still construction happening at all levels: residential, commercial, public works, and the critical infrastructure. So that can be a problem when you're working in close quarters, obviously. And so that's why the job site safety guidance has been such a big deal. And we have found, the National Building Trades has put out guidance for job site safety. And then so has a lot of contractor groups. So everyone is trying to take this very seriously, but implementing that guidance on a work site has been difficult. I'm sure you're aware, and all of our members are aware, how close of quarters they work in construction. I mean, a connector needs to be close to somebody else. Welders need a welder helper. It's hard to maintain 6 feet of distance between one worker and another.
Absolutely. So executive orders, providing unemployment, protecting elections, these are 3 pretty important pillars for what states are doing right now. What else? What else is under the responsibility of states and municipal governments to ensure our safety during a crisis like this, and make sure that if we're not working, we are able to at least support our families?
Yeah, so some of the municipalities have taken on putting moratoriums on collecting rent. That way that, as we just passed through the 1st of April, we only went through a couple of weeks in March where we were under these executive orders. In April, we're going to probably experience the entire month under an executive order. So until people start getting those checks, those unemployment checks, or are able to set up a situation where they can telework, having a moratorium on rent has been extremely helpful in these large municipalities, because the last thing people need to do is worry about losing their home. So there are things like that that are happening. There are a lot of community-based organizations that are making sure that people are getting food and essential supplies. Those are things that are happening at a local level.
All right, thank you. Now, if you're in the position of an iron worker who's been laid off and they're not able to get through to the unemployment insurance system and file a support properly, what should they do in that case?
Keep trying. So the reality is, like I said, we have gone from 4 weeks ago having 282,000 claims across the state to Michigan just having that many last week. So they're extremely overloaded, and you have to just keep trying. I know that that's extremely frustrating. States like New York have instituted a callback, which is helping. So hopefully we'll see more states go in that direction.
I gotcha. And which states right now would you say are the worst offenders as far as responding to the crisis, either from a public safety standpoint or taking care of people who've been laid off?
Florida. Just right off the top, Florida has not been great at implementing job site safety. They have not been great at following federal guidance. Getting unemployment there has been a struggle. So much as that you have to go down to the unemployment office if you can't get through, and you're standing in a line just right next to somebody else, and there's hundreds and hundreds of people. You have to have a PIN number there in order to get your unemployment, and people are seeing that it takes a week and a half just to get the PIN number so that you can apply. So Florida has definitely been a big offender on our list, and I know our members in Florida have had some issues on the job sites where they don't even feel safe because of the proximity issues. So, and then no hand washing stations, and a lack of PPE. So Florida really has been a big offender. We've also seen, Idaho, Maine, Kansas, Louisiana, Alabama again, and then honestly Illinois too, with implementation of unemployment insurance. There has been some, hopefully what we hope is technical glitches, and it will get worked out here very quickly. But those have been the big offending states at this point.
Understood. Well, Michelle, thank you very much for giving us some insight about what's happening on the state level in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, to tie things together, we have a complex system we have a complex system in the United States in order to guarantee safety and security for folks. I want to take a little bit of time to tie all that together. Just like on a job site, we have a dozen different trades have to find a way to coordinate together in order to get the job done. In the governmental system, we have to have Congress providing the funding and the rules. We need executive agencies like the Department of Labor and OSHA to enforce it and provide guidance on how it's done. And then we need states and cities to be able to do their jobs in order to actually get that, for example, unemployment insurance over to the people who need it. All these groups need to be able to work in concert together, and if one link of the chain is weak, the whole thing doesn't work. It can be extremely opaque, extremely confusing, I think, for a lot of folks who are dealing with the government appointed service, like unemployment agencies, and it's up to us to put the right kind of pressure on government in order to make sure that they are able to deliver the goods to us. It's worth taking a step back, though, and asking how we got to this point. This is something that we have to ask ourselves. Should the government have been better prepared for the crisis that we're facing in the United States? Coronavirus broke out in late 2019 and spread overseas very aggressively for the first month of the year. During that time period, there were stockpiles of protective equipment and medical supplies that were not replenished. There were steps that could have been taken in order to protect the public from the spread that weren't. We're in a situation where we're facing these large-scale shutdowns and many people in hospitals because we were not able to stop the virus from getting as bad as it did. And if we look at other countries, we do see that countries such as South Korea, Norway, which had large effective stockpiles at the beginning of the crisis and tested aggressively, got out ahead of the crisis, have had less significant health problems as a result. Less people dying, less people going sick, and a more smoothly running system. Other countries, of course, have done worse. But we do need to ask ourselves: is this something where the federal government was ready? Did we take the proper steps that we needed to in order to head off the crisis? And of course, we can't anticipate everything that's ever going to happen, but we do need to be able to hold our government accountable. There are things that the federal government could be doing that they still aren't, and that goes beyond legislation. For example, the Defense Production Act is a law that empowers the president during a time of emergency such as this to kick industry into higher gear and make sure that we're working and building the materials that we need to get through the crisis. Thanks to offshoring through NAFTA and most favored nation status to China, most of the companies that produced medical supplies in the United States some decades ago have gone out of business. We've lost a lot of our industrial base. It's a sound argument for having a better trade policy. But even in the situation we're in, the Defense Production Act would make it possible for the president to have a large control over private industry's ability to change over their production lines and start making face masks, hand sanitizer, cleaning wipes, other material, ventilators, other materials that we need. Defense Production Act has not been fully invoked and has not been fully utilized. The president has the power to speak to a manufacturer, provide them loans in order to cover the costs of converting their assembly line over to a new type of production, and that in turn would mean more work for ironworkers and turnarounds for that particular project. It has not been used aggressively, and as a result, we still face critical shortages of many pieces of medical protective equipment, and we are still reliant on imports from China. Defense Production Act is one of only many different things that the U.S. federal government should be doing in order to guarantee safety, but it's one that's very important for folks who are involved in construction and manufacturing like we are. We also need to consider the overall direction that the federal government provides to states. Like we said during Michelle's section, the essential industry categories are named by the Department of Homeland Security before states put them into practice. There is a question of should the federal government be providing, should the White House be providing more clearer guidance to states about how tight the controls on work and how widespread the work shutdowns could be. There's also the question of how quickly, how early the government should reopen businesses around the country. The longer we stay closed, of course, the worse economic effect, and that's why it's so important to have coverage for COBRA, coverage for UI, in order to fill the gap for folks. But if we open up too quickly before a vaccine is available, and it will be some time before that's true, the disease could take off again, and any progress that we've made would be undone. In order to make sure that we don't face a situation like this, states and the federal government need to be ready with tracking and testing to make sure that when the economy does open up and people start going back to work, back to public spaces again, that we are able to identify very quickly the people who have COVID-19 and are able to isolate them off. That's the only way to stop the epidemic from taking off again. It's not clear unclear, based on expert opinion, whether those procedures are in place yet. And it's the responsibility of the federal government to not jump too quickly and not reopen the economy, and also the responsibility of both state and federal governments to get that tracking and testing in place in time. That requires the Defense Production Act. That requires clear guidance and leadership from both the White House and executive departments, and that's something where the federal government needs to be able to step up and provide it. Now, as I said, we've seen different results in different countries depending on the outcomes that depending on the programs that they put into place in response in response to the crisis. In the United States case, as we said, we're playing catch up. About a month was lost, and as a result, we're in the depth of the crisis that we're in as well. But in the other country in which we represent members, Canada, we've seen a different response from the federal government, and in addition, we've seen a difference in the actions that we've seen a difference in the level of spread in the disease. So to talk a little bit about the situation facing ironworkers in Canada and the general public, we have Lindsay Maskell, who is a political consultant working for the Ironworkers Canadian office. Lindsay, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Ross. How are you?
All right, thank you very much. Let's first to kick it off, can you tell us a little bit about the situation that ironworkers are facing in Canada right now?
Well, like everybody, we're in quarantine and lockdown, but some construction projects have been determined province by province as essential services. So it varies on a provincial level of what can be proceeding. So, for example, in Ontario, emergency programs needed for things like transit, building hospitals, energy infrastructure gets to continue, but a lot of the residential and commercial is shut down. Ontario and Quebec are our hardest hit provinces, and so they have the most job impacts, but we are very fortunate that we have some provinces that have been doing very well, under 300 cases in places like Manitoba. So we have some areas that should be tracking for opening a bit sooner than others, and we're in this together. And of course, for the Canadians that are listening in, we're obviously very thankful for our national healthcare system.
Well, can you talk a little bit about some of the policies that the federal government and the provinces have put into place?
Yeah, so as I said, right now, with some ironworkers still being able to be working, jobs going, we think we're just under 80% employment right now. But for those that aren't, we have some really great programs that have been put in place. Now, these are changing on a daily basis. Just as we've been on this call, there's some changes being announced for some of the programs from the government for our COVID-19 emergency response plan. The big items that impact our employers and the ironworkers, of course, is the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy. And so this is something that people that are on a job, contractors, can continue if they can't work, if they have to lay people off. Instead of laying them off, the government is providing a 75% wage subsidy to keep them on the payroll. So instead of the government managing all of the claims, this helps employers keep their people on the payroll and subsidizing that until we can get through to the other side of this. That also helps from the perspective of if everybody gets laid off and then a job can restart, that people move around, that you would be going back to the job you were actually working on, and will help make the transition smoother. For those that were not, that weren't on a project, the big item that Canada has been allowed to and able to roll out very quickly is they changed over with tax season, our Canadian Revenue Agency, to defer all of our taxes until later in the summer and turn them all into people to be able to be processing claims. And in Canada, our big element for that is the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, which essentially is if you made $5,000 in the last fiscal year, that you would be eligible for a $2,000 a month automatic payment. We were able to have this set up at rapid speed. It was retroactive to March 15th. So all of the government programs, like the wage subsidy, is retroactive to March 15th. So some people were not shut down before that, so they'll actually get some financial benefit with all of these programs being having that time stamp on them. But the $2,000 a month are for people that either were not on a job or were on EI, so that if their EI benefits roll out, or if they had already used EI and they didn't qualify. So that basically means anybody in Canada that can't work because of the crisis has an automatic payment. It was rolled out for intake a week ago Monday, and by Wednesday, people were getting payments by a call for everybody to sign up online for automatic deposit. So people are now starting to get that money flowing. We know if we don't get money into the economy, it does not help anybody. So they really were moving for rapid speed to get some, programs aren't going to be perfect, but by moving for speed, it gets some money into the economy. The other big thing that's going to be helpful and people might have less awareness about is a loan program that does actually result in money into people's pockets for our contractor partners, which is that there is a bank loan program that's backed by the government, and it would be through whoever has your business account, and you would get a $40,000 loan, and if you repay it within 1 year, $10,000 of that is forgivable. So $10,000 might not seem a lot to one business, but across all of the businesses in Canada, it would make a big impact for our industry. So we're fairly fortunate with the speed at which programs are going here. It's changing on a regular basis. Just as we've been talking, they've changed the wage subsidy eligibility so that for a second time to make sure that the catchment includes more and more people. So our federal government nationally is covering off our jobs and our economy process. The provinces have been very quiet towards this because our provinces are the ones that deliver our frontline healthcare. So they have been focusing on that, and the federal government's been focusing on our economic recovery. But they're going to need to start to come together for our economic recovery plan, like they did after the 07-08 economic crisis, for a big stimulus project. And we know, and I was fortunate to, I was a political advisor to the Premier of Ontario during that economic crisis. Just a couple of years into my career, getting to it was very interesting to get to be a part of how that happens. And so we know that part of Canada's economic response is going to include a big, large-scale government-funded infrastructure stimulus spending package, which will be a big benefit to our economy when we're able to come out of quarantine. So we've got a lot of things on the go. It's changing. I'm like in the States, our Prime Minister is up every single day in a press conference being available. But it's changing as we figure out different groups that might not have been caught as they make policy very, very quickly. And for us, figuring out how they actually get work done by getting together. So our biggest fight, very Canadian, is whether they do virtual sittings or work with just less people, convening Parliament to get things passed. Like you, all of this, sorry, I'm having a little headphone issue all of a sudden. All of this policy needs to pass through government, so they have to figure out how to actually make government work. So a system that was set up for meeting in person that can't happen now. So we're lucky that our different levels of government, even though we're in a minority government situation, have been working really, really well to get things moving and get things done. It's more just a question about how we actually have them sit to do this.
What's the response been from the opposition parties in Parliament?
So the opposition parties have obviously done everything to make the bills move quickly that need to happen to pass because it's holding up the money. So the big thing was the wage subsidy legislation. It's a $75 billion program to start. And so they needed to reconvene and make this happen quickly. So this includes things like weekend sittings. The other thing that's been interesting is seeing where an opposition party has had an idea that the government then just very quickly adopted. So less politics to make sure that this happens to not slow anything down. There was an initial stall in the beginning and it was an interesting lesson both for government and opposition, where the Emergency Measures Act, first piece of legislation to try to get everything done at one time, was very broad, and it was very concerning because it would have had some broad sweeping powers. You always have to be a bit nervous of something that goes too far in that light, because it takes a while to reel those things back in if we give away too much independence. So the first piece of legislation went too far, and the opposition pushed back, and the government made that change. And that's the money then that would have stalled on the 2000 CURB funding, so the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. So we had one item that happened right away that slowed things down by about a day. And it was a good lesson both for government and opposition about working together to make sure that things happen the way they need to happen. The other thing is that once a week, sometimes more than once a week, all of the premiers are meeting with the Prime Minister on coordination for the projects. So even though we have many conservative-led provinces and a Liberal premier and a minority government, and very Canadian thing to do, but just natural crisis response, is everyone has been doing everything possible to move things as quickly as they can. We've also had great support in something that's, people have been very concerned about after our election last October about Western alienation. And Western Canada has fared very well from a health perspective through this crisis, but they were very well prepared. So it's been really great to see things like Premier Jason Kenney providing PPE shipments for hospitals in other provinces where they had extra capacity, for having ideas to help out. Because for Canada, if Western Canada is locked down and not working, it actually impacts the whole Canadian economy. So, having to work together to get these things done is really important. And we're seeing the Prime Minister and the premiers that sometimes don't get along spending a lot more time talking together and finding solutions for opening up our economy in a safe way for people.
All right. So a question that may be on many folks' minds. Is the healthcare system in Canada ready for the financial practical burdens of folks continuing to get sick as the curve rises and lowers?
Yeah, so, the big misconception that people always say when we talk about healthcare in Canada is people say it's free healthcare. It's not free. We pay for it via our taxes. So it is definitely been interesting to see province by province. So as I mentioned earlier, each province manages their own healthcare system. So it's national healthcare, but it's funded and administered by provinces. And so different provinces were ready to different extents depending on the political decisions by each province. So places that had not put as big enough focus might not have had enough equipment or enough ICU beds, but they've been able to move very quickly for that. We're pretty lucky. We are not, when you look at the graph, we are in no way of threat of running into risk of not having enough ventilators or ICU beds in Canada. But it is about the distribution of them and where, so trying to not overwhelm areas where the population can't handle it. So there's a big distribution item. The healthcare system, where they're expecting, for example, in the most populous province, that this is, a $20 billion epidemic. But at the same time, it's a system that we're committed to funding and has been essential for us. I think a big problem in Canada that has been exposed in our healthcare system is the healthcare quality in long-term care homes and senior homes. Right now in Ontario and Quebec, almost 70% of the deaths are in care facilities. So it's kind of showing the weaknesses in our healthcare system from a long-term care perspective. But it's a big drain on our economy, obviously, but it's something that we as a nation are set up to do and is needed, especially as we're, to restart the economy. We need people to go out and work, and there is some risk to that they may get sick. And so we're thankful we have a system in place for that.
And what is still left to be done through the government response? It does sound like things are moving, but what's the biggest shortfall? What do we need provinces and the federal government to step up and to the plate on right now?
Well, that's a great question, Ross, because there's still a lot. So it sounds positive, but it's more about being in the right position and moving in the right position. The big item is the wage subsidy that we're going to be very dependent on, that our contractors are going to be very dependent on for employing iron workers. The intake for that is the legislation passed this weekend in Parliament, but it does not actually, the intake online through the My CRA business account. The intake date hasn't been announced yet. The government has said that money is going to flow within 6 weeks when they announced it 2 weeks ago, which means that we're still potentially a month away from businesses getting access to the funds they so desperately need to pay Canadians and to pay our workers. So that is not moving as quickly as it should. And there's been some ideas about ways to do that, whether it's through financial institutions putting the money up and then the wage subsidy repaying that to make that move faster. So that would be the biggest item. Another item that has been overlooked is really just everything from rent, which they're trying to figure out rental situations for businesses. So where you have a piece of property that that element in the financial cycle. and then a plan about how we reopen safely. So they've started to talk about it, and different provinces are going to be able to do it at a different pace and time. And I think a big thing is making sure that we have the right health and safety measures in place, particularly on construction sites, where we're asking people to come to work even while we're supposed to be at home and in quarantine. So in Canada, that means if you're on a transit project, if you're on a hospital project, if you're on an energy project, for the most part, they're to stay working. And each province has been trying to play catch up on health and safety inspections and regulations required to make sure that if we're having people working during this time, that they're not doing so in a high risk position. Certain provinces have done measures like recalling retired and former inspectors, health and safety inspectors, to make sure that when we are starting to reopen work sites, they have what they need in place to do so, and to to make sure that we have our workers being in the safest position possible. And then, of course, the big item is going to be a joint federal, provincial, and municipal plan of an economic stimulus package. And we know what these have looked like in the past, but this has had a very different effect on our economy. I've been saying it's sort of like, we're causing harm to ourselves to help the situation. It's a bit like cancer, right? If somebody is taking chemotherapy, makes it worse before it gets better. So with doing this damage to our economy ourselves, it's going to feel different than after the 07-08 economic crisis in Canada, for sure. So it's not the exact same playbook. And we're not seeing enough yet of the provinces and the federal government spending a lot of time on that to know that we're going to be doing everything possible to come out of this in the best economic position that we can. It's really about speed of money into people's hands at this point in businesses. If we're asking businesses and our contractor partners to keep thousands of iron workers on the payroll at this time, waiting a month for that money is actually a really big, a big burden. And we're very lucky, though, that these programs do include covering off, inclusion of our benefit payments. But there's still a lot that can be done. And I think that it's really about the speed at which a government of any size there's one of us for every 10 of you in America. And it's a lot of work to get this money moving at that pace and speed and troubleshooting things as they go. So I think we're suffering from some of the same challenges across the border, and with our border unfortunately closed right now. But there are some optimistic signs. But if I were a contractor being asked to keep all of these people on payroll and to do this job, to help be part of the solution from the government, that I would be concerned that it's going to be 6 weeks before I see that money.
I understand. Well, thank you, Lindsay, for shedding some light on the situation. We'll go now to a video from Mark Arsenault, who's stakeholder relations for the Canadian office. We sat down with Mark for a few minutes and talked about the situation with the building trades in Canada. Hand it over.
The Canadian building trade unions got together on March 17th to prepare a submission to the federal government, and with 5 main points. The points are consistent across the construction trades on how we can improve and strengthen the representation for our members and our contractor community in the construction and maintenance industries. And so what we sent to the Canadian federal government was a request for specifics in terms of job protection measures for construction workers. Secondly, unemployment insurance extension for those in the construction industry that may have already used up all of their benefits. Thirdly, we have in place the right to refuse unsafe work due to possibility of exposure with other workers with COVID-19 like symptoms, and workplaces that do not follow proper social distancing space as suggested by the healthcare professionals. We also touched on emergency measures for pension plans regarding funding and solvency. And lastly, a work share agreement available to all employers, including construction and maintenance industry. So that was March 17th that was sent on behalf of the Canadian Building Trade Unions to the federal government. each individual province has their own essential services, what we are looking at as critical services, and mainly to support critical infrastructure, similar to how things are being done south of the border in terms of the energy sector with transmission and generating station powerhouses, and water, wastewater services, as well as certain specifications around residential construction, mainly for residential construction that's nearing completion, to continue to complete those. Any infrastructure or critical infrastructure projects such as hospitals and transit. Since our submission to the federal government on the 17th of March, we've had 3 key ministry conference calls. First, we met with the Federal Minister of Labor to have reach out to the Ministry of Labor and extend all efforts to support the government on managing this health crisis and provide some feedback specific to the construction and maintenance industry. And we also touched base on a little bit of a shorter call with the Ministry of Infrastructure. The Ministry of Infrastructure conversation was specific to the construction trades and the ironworkers who are engaged on several bridge and light rail transit projects, as well as some key new hospital work. We also invested some time with the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development. That was an excellent conversation because that was the start of where I think we're going to next. And that is how we can support the federal government with what we will be expecting for an emergency economic stimulus plan. And so we left off with our conversations with the ministers that we'll continue to perform the work that we perform with our contractors, more specifically or more importantly on the projects that they've deemed critical, and we'll be working with our contractor community to ensure that we're following and applying all the best health practices and recommendations from the health professionals. And then we will continue to work amongst the Canadian Building Trades Executive Board to prepare next steps with the federal government on how we can work with them to ensure that we get everyone back out to work when the time's right. And we do it in such a way that we come back better and stronger.
And welcome back. We'll turn now to some audience questions for the legislative team, for Lindsay, Michelle, and Corey. First off, we have many questions asking about eligibility for assistance for unemployed folks. Both the EI program in Canada and the UI program in America have been expanded, but people have questions about how are both governments determining whether eligibility for these new benefits? First off, I'll hand it to Lindsay. How is the Canadian government determining whether you've been laid off or eligible for this extra support due to COVID-19?
Well, so by moving, essentially they expanded EI into the new Canadian Emergency Response Benefit so that it was being processed in 2 different shops. And the way that, we've had 3 changes since it was announced 3 weeks ago to improve eligibility so that the number of people that can get access to it is larger. Initially, it was that you needed to go 14 days without any income to be eligible. Now they've made it that you can make up to $1,000 a month and still get the $2,000 a month benefit. They have made it very broad. So they've removed exemptions like if you had already had an EI claim, when your EI runs out, that you are then able to move over to this CURB funding. It was made eligible for people who, even for example, seasonal workers. So there's some people like students who go to school and then are able to do some construction work seasonally, that they would even be eligible because it's work that they were planning or expecting to be able to do. The only restriction has been that if you made $5,000 in the previous financial year. So as long as people are signed up on the CRA site for direct deposit, they've been able to move money fairly quickly to people. And what they're doing is going for speed in terms of perfection, in terms of eligibility. So they're changing the program fairly regularly as they discover some flaws or people that might have been left behind in it. But they are going for speed for this. So the big thing where we often have people moving in and with the construction sector, for ironworkers moving in and out of the EI process, depending on projects, is that it was made available for everybody, regardless of what would have been previous EI rules. So it's a very broad sweeping program, and we've been very lucky for that. But again, $2,000, depending on what part of Canada you live in. In some cases, it doesn't make a mortgage payment, and in some places it's fine, but it's about getting us by. And that program is in place for 16 weeks. Starting March, and it was retroactive to March 15th. So we plan for 4 months to have people have those emergency benefits, but they do need to reapply each month. So in the middle of each month, they reapply for the following month with a very simple online process. So people were very happy with the speed of that. But again, it continues to be, it was just changed yesterday. So they keep updating it to make sure that it's working for as many people as possible.
Okay, and handing it over to the American team, how in the United States are we determining who's eligible for this COVID-related unemployment insurance, and is that the same state to state?
Federally, the CARES Act expanded unemployment insurance to touch anybody who has been affected by COVID-19. So whether that's your job site being shut down, whether that's you being in contact with someone who has tested positive, or let's say you have a sick family member who might have been tested positive. They've expanded the rules for UI to be applicable to them. And then I'll get it, Michelle can take it over from here in regards to whether or not the states are implementing it all the same.
So additionally, on that too, is that the requirement that you meet a certain hour threshold has now been waived as well. So this is good news for our apprentices and any of our journeymen that have been out on a leave of absence for injury or anything else. So that, like in the state of Washington, you have to have 680 hours in the previous year, and that's not under consideration anymore. So that is good. And then they have also implemented that the able and available to work is supposed to be waived, and work searches do not need to be done. But similar to Canada, you still do need to submit your claim every week on the unemployment system. And generally this can be done online. I believe the problems that we're having with the UI systems are initial problems. So when someone is just trying to apply, once you're in there, I have not heard of any widespread problems of doing your weekly claim. So that is good news. So the help with the eligibility in the amount of hours that you have, and then also similar to Canada, if you've been, and like Corey said, if you've contracted or been exposed to COVID, that is a reason. But there also is additional reasons that you can apply for unemployment now too, including if your child's school has closed, and it is because you're of the COVID, obviously, and you're eligible for unemployment at that point too.
Thank you. Now, touched during the during the American section about how the building trades is negotiating for support for our pension programs during this next round of legislation. And we have a question from Terrence in Ontario asking about how the current work forecast is going to affect the security of his pension. So the question in both countries, if you guys can go into a little bit more detail, is how can government help us make sure that our pensions are secure through this process?
So from the American and federal standpoint, the issue of pensions being financially stable was obviously an issue before the pandemic happened and is going to probably get worse as the weeks go by, as fewer people are working and putting money into these plans. We are asking the federal government just to stop the bleeding when it comes to these, and things are still being negotiated right now in the Senate with both parties. But as of right now, what we are hearing is that there might be a cash infusion to just keep these plans afloat, to make sure that our folks that have put in the hard hours and all of their time will still be able to retire with some money at the end of the day.
All right, thank you. And Lindsay, can you speak at all to anything the Canadian government might be contemplating in order to protect the retirement system?
For sure. So first of all, we're very fortunate that with the wage subsidy program that essentially runs like people are still being paid. They're still all of the systems are still in place, which is better than through in our EI or the new curve system, so that money is going into the pension plans. So even though they might not physically be able to work, the economy from a paid perspective looks like it is. But for those that are really impacted, there is now a relief program for federally regulated pension plan sponsors, defined benefit plans. So they will basically look at if any fund is struggling, that they are going to have a system in place for helping backstop that, and particularly ones that were already impacted. So there's also a group in place working through the ones that had already been impacted about what they need to do to backstop those, to make sure that we don't move into a system of now having more people be in a vulnerable position that were really dependent on their pensions and benefits. So the wage subsidy program was Canada's response to try to prevent that issue. When we have, we're very fortunate that we actually have a lot of major pension regulated industries in Canada, in addition to the construction sector, and it was of utmost importance. So by going through the wage subsidy to have it basically appear as though the economy is functioning as normally, and those benefits being able to be paid and supported by the government through an employer-led project will really help our pension security. This is also something the CBTU is spending a lot of time looking at, about making sure that we can do everything to have the protection needed. So Mark spoke to that a little bit, but it's of course one of the main agenda items for the work that we do collaboratively with the other unions through the CBTU.
Understood. Absolutely. Now, another question that we got from the membership, George wants to know what are the chances of getting an infrastructure bill out of one of these packages? Obviously, it's been something we've been fighting for a very long time in the United States. In Canada, we did see infrastructure investment from the Trudeau government, which is moving forward, but maybe there's more to be done. On the American side, what are our actual realistic chances of getting this done?
I don't think anyone really knows at this point. We have been promised a massive infrastructure bill by our current president since he came into office. But with the way things are right now, they realize that this needs to be done sooner rather than later. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is starting to put together their big plans of what they would like to see in infrastructure. People aren't sure whether or not the entire plan will be put into place, but we know that we should be expecting at least small aspects of a larger infrastructure bill. So stuff that we see regularly almost every year. So stuff that regards the highway transit fund, surface transportation issues, water issues, basic things that we see every year that come up again and again and again. And we're also hearing talks about the negotiation of budget caps for these programs, which we've had for the past decade. So hopefully we'll be seeing more money than we're used to seeing in these programs.
So another question that we have from South Carolina. Member asked that since we're working at a nuke plant during shutdowns, are we essential workers? We've touched on essential categories before, but just to clarify it, because we've received some more questions about it. I mean, how are iron workers in general essential workers?
There, Ross, there are a lot of industries that we work in where the answer to that is yes. Where we would see them not falling in essential work is some of that commercial work that's being done. But a nuclear site, absolutely, you are an essential worker on a nuclear site, as well as any chemical, LNG, refinery, anything like that that produces energy essentially is an essential worker.
And the determination about how widely that's interpreted, whether it's just narrowly a few projects that are considered essential or whether it's almost all of construction, that's being made by the governors, right?
That is correct. The governors are making that decision. But so far, like we talked before, anything that's considered essential, which is in that critical infrastructure category, is not shutting down.
Okay. So the answer to one of the most common questions we got, why am I working or why am I not working? The answer is depends on where you live, correct?
That's correct. And whether or not your field of construction has been deemed essential or not. Yes.
Okay.
Ross, if I can mention something on this subject of just to touch about something Mark mentioned about critical versus essential. So we've been using the term, and just for Canadians that are getting communications from the Canadian office or from their provincial office, you're going to see us using the term critical versus essential, because in Canada, as the determination of an essential worker does potentially have some impact on collective bargaining rights. And so we are, the government will call us essential workers, but we are also saying critical in terms of not having, it's a legal definition that could potentially have some impacts. So we have an understanding province by province that we're using slightly different vernacular, and people are, it basically just means we're still protected in the ways that Mark had mentioned of being able to refuse unsafe work and still have all of our bargaining and protection rights by the benefits of being a unionized sector. So it's we use a slightly different term from that perspective. And each province gets to make the decision. But you might see two different terms floating around for that in Canada, and that's the reason for it.
Okay, and final question I'll put to the panel. Lindsay, you had mentioned that Parliament and most of the provincial legislative assemblies have found ways to work together and move legislation forward during the crisis. I'll put the straight answer to the American team. Are we seeing a well-functioning and effective government in the United States right now?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, yes and no. I'm sorry to say it that way. Yes, they are trying. No, the practice is just, it's lagging. It's severely deficient. Yes.
Yeah, we saw a lot more cohesiveness and working together at the beginning of March, and we're starting to see it's stalling. And things are slowing up when things need to be ramping up when it comes to getting more help out to states.
And that's breaking down along party lines?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So
same at the state level as well, Ross. The states that we see controlled by a Republican legislature, even if they have a Democratic governor, they're fighting the governor on everything, and vice versa. So there's a problem in the mechanism, and we're still extremely partisan.
Understood. Okay, so it's going to be on us in order to push things through if the parties aren't able to cooperate together. All right. Well, thank you to Michelle. Thank you, Lindsay, for joining us remotely today. You guys both stay healthy out there.
Thank you. You too.
All right. We've talked about quite a few. Talked about quite a few issues that we're fighting for on both the state and local level. There's a lot that government can do in order to help us through this crisis, but it's not going to happen unless we directly take action and force Congress, force the states in order to do what we need to do in order to do their jobs. And it's pretty easy during a crisis like this to feel like we're on our own. So we're going to turn to in this final segment to what's going on with different locals and district councils across the country. Hear what's going on. Hear what real practical problems are facing iron workers, and then talk a little bit about what we can do even under these circumstances social distancing circumstances in order to take action and defend our rights. So first we're going to play a video recorded earlier with Jack Jarrell, Southeastern States District Council President, where he talks a little bit about the situation in his state. Jack is based out of Florida, which, as we heard during the legislative section, is one of the states with one of the most problems in the enactment of its UI program. I'll hand it over to the video.
We're still running about 90% employment. We've had some projects that were postponed, and of course, I think everybody knows Disney shut down for a period. But overall, we're running about 90%. You know, we try and keep our members informed about, you know, social distancing, you know, keeping your hands washed, heighten the awareness of your surroundings to protect themselves. Things that we've seen on different projects is general contractors and subcontractors, and meeting with them or contacting them by phone to when we become aware of members not feeling safe, is to try and communicate to them that we need to follow the federal guidelines as best as possible.
So in certain states, you know, we've seen less restrictive actions taken to close job sites and to close businesses. And it sounds like many of the states that your folks are working in are taking that approach. It sounds like lots of local unions are taking some great steps to keep iron workers healthy on the job, but could you talk a little bit more about how locals are adapting to that?
You know, getting with the general contractors when a member has reached out to a businessman or a business agent, you know, they contact the employer and try and do a job site visit. If, you know, some locals have provided soap, you know, if members feel that there's, you know, hand washing stations to you, porta potties and all that stuff, and just try and keep that awareness with the general contractors, because we've seen it. I've been getting quite a few phone calls in reference to, it feels like the general contractors and the owners are not following the federal guidelines to this pandemic.
Jack, can you tell us a little bit about the challenges iron workers have encountered recently while filing for unemployment benefits under some of the expanded rules in state?
Well, with us having 90% employment, we really haven't seen major issues with the unemployment due to the membership. Now, with you know, what I've read in the states, the unemployment system here in Florida has been totally overloaded. One of the issues that we're running into with the membership, and if they're feeling unsafe on a job and they quit, that creates a problem for unemployment. You know, if they're not following the federal guidelines for this pandemic, and if you feel unsafe, or if you have a wife and children at home, and being an essential, working essential, and carrying that home every day, stopping to get gas, you know, being on the job, not having proper sanitation on the jobs with additional porta potties or hand washing stations, it creates great concern for the member, because if he feels unsafe and he brings that home to his kids and his wife, and he quits because he feels unsafe, and now he's in an unemployment of an appeal, which takes considerable more time to get unemployment. And it's just, that's a major issue. That's a problem. And that's why the managers and agents are doing their best to get with these general contractors and make sure they're following the proper guidelines.
Absolutely. Jack, is that a situation that you're starting to see unfold a bit more frequently?
We're still running into it. I haven't, the managers, I think, are taking a pretty good hold in reference to this. So I haven't heard any new cases, or I should say, heard of people quitting.
Okay.
Due to not following the federal guidelines.
Jack, have you noticed any changes? How have members' attitudes changed towards politics or towards specific elected officials in light of their response to the coronavirus crisis?
Well, what I think is, with this pandemic, and, I can't speak for the total membership, but I think most of the majority thinks that the federal, state, and local governments have not did what they were supposed to do in reference to, I will use Florida as an example. There was quite a bit of an uproar when Governor DeSantis did not close the beaches down for spring break and so on and so forth. And they were just, my opinion, are too relaxed, just like in the state of Georgia, where that governor opened the beaches back up under, local governments. He overruled that, opened up 100 miles worth of beaches. Overall, I think with the membership, I don't think they're real happy. I really don't. I can't see where anyone, when you see how many cases of this pandemic is within the United States, and then you look throughout the world, and the reaction was too slow. I think that's going to play a major role in the elections, and keeping them informed is one of the key things. Is we don't know where this is going to end. We can sit here and speculate and say, oh, this is going to be over in a month, or, we keep hearing that on the news. It's not going to be over in a month. For one, you don't have a vaccine. For one, you can't test people. You can't even buy a dust mask. But we're supposed to be over this in a month?
Jack, what advice would you give to a business manager or a political coordinator looking for a way to activate members for the first time in the midst of all of this?
Tell them the importance of this pandemic and how your elected officials have reacted to it. And to get them engaged, you have to find ways to get your membership engaged in politics, to organizing and everything. And with this pandemic and what the governments have not done is a perfect avenue to get people engaged, keep them informed by social media, mailings, word of mouth, all these different things that we can utilize to explain the concerns and to hold them accountable. I'm worried about their safety for them and their families, because I have a report that we have had roughly about 13 cases now of positive within this council. That has changed over the last week and a half, which I get weekly updates from all the locals in reference to this pandemic of, how many was their members tested. And that feedback only comes when, of course, they find out about it. So there could be a lag, but I do have weekly reports that my managers fill out and send it to me to try and keep me abreast of everything going on.
Jack, you touched a bit on local unions handling their local union elections remotely by mail. How do you think this is all going to affect local unions and their plans to get out the vote in November's election?
I'm a firm believer in mail-in ballots. I've been doing it for years because, it takes time out of your day and you have that one day. If you get a mail-in ballot, it's usually, and don't hold me to this, you probably know, it's probably usually a month in advance prior to the date of the primary or the general election. Mm-hmm. So you can make time and fill out your, of course, ballot and mail it or drop it off. I drop mine off. I do not put mine in the mail. I drop it off. When I go by there, they got boxes right there. You just drop it in the box, and I'm a firm believer in that. But absolutely. I think that's the way the membership should vote anyways.
Me too. I have been an early and absentee ballot voter for many years. You never know, especially in this line of work. You never know what's going to happen on election day. If you might wind up on some overtime, might wind up a little further away on the road. You never know.
You never know, but you have that option, right?
Yes, definitely. Well, Jack, thank you. It has been a pleasure hearing from the southeastern states this morning.
Thank you and welcome back. All right, to unpack a little bit of this, we're joined by Gina Maglianico, our political representative based out of Cleveland, Ohio. And Gina, how are you doing today?
Doing okay. How are you, Ross?
Doing all right, thank you. I want to ask you, we've heard quite a bit of what's going on in the southeastern states from Jack. What are we hearing elsewhere in the country from locals, district councils, and regular iron workers?
Absolutely. We're hearing a lot of the same, honestly. In parts of the country where folks are still primarily working, it sounds like construction is generally considered essential. So a lot of our folks are still on the job. But there is generally a sense that the federal guidelines and the way that state and local government are applying them is lacking. It's not really there doing the job that it needs to do to keep iron workers safe and healthy. So in that respect, we are hearing from a lot of business managers that they are stepping in and having those conversations with contractors, just like Jack mentioned. And our locals and district councils and contractors are really being proactive about, making sure folks have the resources they need and things that they need on the job to keep themselves healthy and safe.
Now, in order to get past this crisis, we need government help. We need government intervention. And in order to survive the unemployment wave that we're getting, we need government action. We've talked a lot in this program about what government is doing, but the question is, can a regular, everyday iron worker have an input in this process? Is there anything that you can do?
Absolutely. Elected officials primarily want to hear from people in their districts, in their states. They want to hear from the average voter, and coincidentally enough, that is most iron workers. Along with that, our department has taken on a pretty significant undertaking in the past few weeks. Many of you have likely received phone calls from an organizer calling, asking you to contact a representative, whether that's been a member of Congress, a U.S. senator, a local elected official. We've been making calls in a variety of states. And are going to continue doing that. The idea is to connect folks with those elected officials and remind them that, these issues that are being voted on are truly impacting working people in their home districts, whether that has been, asking for an expansion on the unemployment insurance, which we were successful with about 2 weeks ago in the last package, or currently having that conversation reminding elected officials that, working people do need to continue to have access to health insurance for the duration of this crisis. The biggest movement that we see among elected officials comes after a rash of phone calls from iron workers. So that's proof in the pudding for me. It does work, and there are plenty of opportunities to get involved.
So tell us a little bit more about how our union is helping connect people through to congressional offices and push our elected representatives to do their jobs.
Absolutely. We are doing some remote phone banking. A number of organizers as well as staff in our department have been making those phone calls and setting those systems up in a variety of states. In addition, we are also able to set up some online petitions and email forms, so folks have another round of ways to access elected officials. And if anyone in a certain part of the country is in need of finding contact information for state and local officials as well as their federal representatives, we are here and able to make that connection.
I see. So can you talk a little bit about the legislative hotline that we're running? How does it work, and how do ironworkers use it?
I sure can. The legislative hotline is an automated system. It is currently live and running. So if folks want to call that phone number, or if an organizer calls and asks if they can connect you, they are asking to connect you to the legislative hotline. The way that line is set up, it asks some very, very simple information. It really asks for a name and a zip code. And then that system automatically connects you to the representative for your home area or for the zip code that you've entered. So when folks are entering that information, please, 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 it is strongly recommended to use your home zip code, not necessarily the office. Definitely make sure we are getting you connected to the representatives that you are personally able to vote for.
So the system connects a member through to their member of Congress or senator, whatever the case may be. What should an ironworker say once they're connected through? What should they expect? If you haven't, many folks on this call probably haven't called their member of Congress before. What do they do?
We've had a number of people get very nervous. They're like, get a little shifty in their seat. I don't know that I'm ready to have that conversation with my senator himself or herself. That's okay. In most instances, folks are connected either to a voicemail box or to a staffer who happens to be answering the phone at the office that day. I would say 90% of calls that come in are being connected to some sort of voicemail or message system. What we are primarily asking for at this point and encouraging ironworkers to talk about is that access to healthcare insurance, health insurance. So that would look a little something like the expansion of COBRA subsidies that Corey has talked about throughout the day, as well as making sure there is support for multi-employer healthcare plans. It is truly important and really the mission of all of this, all of the field program that we are currently running, to make sure that no iron worker is forced to go without health insurance at any point of this crisis, whether they are currently on the job or currently laid off. That's not something that should matter. We definitely want to make sure folks are taken care of throughout.
So this allows us to go at congressional lobbying with a 1-2 punch. We have voters, constituents calling in from the district, telling offices that there's a problem, that people need their health insurance to be covered. And then our legislative team in D.C. is speaking directly to the staff and members of Congress saying, this is a problem in your district, this is the way to solve it, we need these COBRA extensions before people's hour banks run out. Correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's pivot real quick and talk a little bit about elections. Michelle did speak about some changes that are happening in the states in the way that elections are being done. What should iron workers have in mind as they're going to the polls, and what can our union do to help protect members' rights to vote?
Definitely. I know a number of states, many states have already held their primary elections this spring. Those with later elections have encountered some very interesting, very last-minute changes. Folks voting in Ohio, we are still technically voting in the March 17th primary. Yes, I know it's April. Absentee ballots, they changed this over to an all-mail ballot election for the first time in Ohio history. So this is kind of our testing ground to see if this really does work in states that are not used to voting 100% by mail. As Michelle mentioned, there are currently only 2 states who hold their elections remotely, 100% remotely, on a regular basis right now. It is something that many states are looking at as an option as we get into the fall and into November's election. So my best advice for iron workers, contact either your state board of elections or your county board of elections. Make sure you are registered to vote with plenty of time to spare. In most cases, you can either register online or go ahead and print out the form, sign it, and return it to your county board of elections. There are always options to do that without interacting face-to-face in person with a county official. with that, also the real key in voting by mail is definitely know your deadlines. In most cases, you will have to request an absentee ballot. And again, in many states, you can do that online or by printing out the form and returning it. County boards of elections and state boards of elections do have drop boxes set up outside. So if you're uncomfortable with putting either your ballot request or your ballot in the mail, you can drop it off in person right there. There's a drop box in the parking lot. So again, essentially hands-free, but folks are still able to cast their ballot. Michelle mentioned it, and I know many of us here on the call today, and Jack and I talked about it a little bit in our conversation earlier. It really is nice to be able to sit down at your kitchen table, fill out your ballot. If you encounter a question, you can do a little bit of additional research right there and just kind of take your time and be well educated on the issues and on the candidates in front of you.
Thank you. Now, and elections are going to be as important as they ever were this year. This is the role of a lifetime for all of these elected officials. All these members of Congress need to be able to deliver, and the only way we can possibly hold them accountable is if we are able to show up and vote this coming November. I'd like to ask you, besides the legislative hotline, what other things can ironworkers do in order to put pressure on their elected officials to do the right thing?
Yeah. A lot of times we hear stories of folks sending a letter, writing a letter to the editor, maybe participating in some type of town hall, a telephone town hall. Most members of Congress, as well as many governors, are currently holding telephone town halls. They look a little something like this, or you may receive a phone call asking you to join. And it is essentially just another chance for public comment, for public questions, for that elected official to be able to interact with voters. These are really, really great places to be able to ask questions and to move along the agenda, to push for those items that working people truly need to weather the storm right now.
And letter campaigns have been pretty successful for the ironworkers in the recent past. That's how we beat the IRAP attack that came at us last summer, correct?
Yes.
So I also want to ask you. You mentioned that many ironworkers are nervous the first time that they're reaching out to a congressional office. What's the most important message that they need to get through? If they're uncomfortable, if they don't feel like they know the ins and outs of a policy issue, I mean, what's the most important thing for them to get across when they're talking to an elected official or the representative about an issue?
Absolutely. The most important part, and really the reason that we ask folks to make phone calls and to make that direct contact with an elected official, is to put a human face on the issue. So if you are able to articulate and tell your story, why is it that having access to continued health insurance matters for me and for my family at this point in time, that's going to have a much, much stronger impact on how that official is going to vote or how that official is going to look at an issue. And that's ultimately the goal, that no matter what issue that ironworkers are calling and talking about, it really boils down to, how does this affect my family? How does this affect my dinner table tomorrow night? Being able to humanize these issues that oftentimes become, words on a screen, words on a piece of paper. A lot of elected officials wind up looking at these things at such an in-depth level that they become simply data points. And it is relatively easy to lose the humanity in that. So just being able to bring it home and remind them, the decisions they're making, the choices they're making do have an impact on real people.
All right, so the legislative hotline, we'll go ahead and post it on the bottom of the screen. Ironworkers can call it now, can call it right after the program, and call it afterwards. And if you hear from an organizer or a volunteer reaching out to you, telling you that they can, giving you a call and connecting you through to a member of Congress, please do so, because that means that we are in the middle of a major legislative push, something that where hearing from constituents is going to make the difference between a senator or a member of Congress doing their job or not. So Gina, I really do appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. We've heard we've gone over a lot of material today, and unfortunately we didn't have enough time to go over every single question we got from membership. But we will be posting this video on the website next week, and when we do so, we will accompany it with a wider selection of questions we couldn't get to, with written answers from the staff. So be sure to check back on that. This is a major crisis, a big fight for all of us, whether we're working or not, whether we're sick, members of our family are sick, whether we're employed or fear unemployment. It's an uncertain time, and we're going to need to be able to stick together in order to get through it. So to close out our program, we're going to turn it back to General President Eric Dean. And Eric, I'll give you the question that I think is in a lot of people's minds right now. At a time like this, why is it important for us to stick together as a union? Sorry, Eric, we're having some audio problems at the moment.
I think his mic is muted.
I am. User error on my end.
All right, go ahead and start on over.
That was a great question. Before I answer it, I want to thank you and your staff. The Canadian content, the U.S. content, whether it be federal, provincial, or by state, I think you can see that our international is working for a political solution to the day-to-day needs of working men and women. We have to stick together, whether we're fighting for frontline workers that are not in the building trades, whether it be nurses, police officers, our members are deemed essential, that we get the proper safety equipment. We can't retreat, and we know how to amplify our voice by sticking together. We need to focus around the needs that we need for our members. And it's not us putting words in your mouth, it's telling you if there's a specific issue in a province or a state, or to call a federal legislator to be able to articulate what our voice is for our brothers and sisters in our union, in the fellow building trades members unions, and then across the labor movement. And for the people who aren't lucky enough to be in a union, we got to speak for them too. And we got to stand up for what's right, and that's safety on the workplace. It's financial security, whether it be through unemployment, healthcare, or pension reform. And it's got to be for our long-term security. We know with the stock market collapse, people's dry powder, AKA their money, may not put us to work long-term. We'll finish up the jobs we've been on, but we need to financially secure that there's working opportunities. And that's the time when federal government should be invested in those programs. We need to stick together like we've never stuck together before. Not what party are you from? This disease knows no partisanship, and our message should not know whether you lean right or left politically. I'm telling you, we've got to stick together, and that's how we support our brothers and sisters throughout the labor movement and workers across the spectrum.
Thank you, Eric. And with that, we'll bring the program today to a close. I'd like to thank the Press Club for hosting us today. I'd like to thank all of our expert speakers for their time and knowledge. And I'd like to thank all of the ironworkers who joined us throughout the program for their questions and for their attention. Like we've said, this is going to be a tough time, but we will get together as long as we stay strong as a union. And I ask that all of us stay safe out there, whether they're at home right now or on the job, and continue to come home safe every day.